Hi everyone, my name is Sellah Bogonko and I have just finished an extremely long interview with Richie on CTA. I hope you get to watch it. Please subscribe on YouTube, Cleaning the Airwaves. CTA, Cleaning the Airwaves. I'm glad to know even the pros normally go through this.
Tunaro. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are back. Hey, I won't even lie to you. This is a second take. Jitters too. Welcome to another season of The Playhouse. This is season 5 of The Playhouse, and we are super excited to be back. I've met a lot of you, and a lot of you have been asking me emails. I've seen your DMs. Some of you have bumped in different places, and you've been like, Richie, when is CTA coming back? Hiki tunanijenga. When are you bringing this thing back? All in God's timing, as I like to say. So it is an honor and a pleasure and a privilege that you are giving us your time, your attention, and welcome to season 5 of The Playhouse. One thing that I'm going to promise you is that every single time when we stop The Playhouse, because we've stopped, we constantly stop, but when we stop and then we come back bigger, better, more impactful, with different guests. So it is a pleasure to be back. And season 5, this is the premiere, the very first series of season 5, with an amazing guest. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, with me I have an incredible woman of God. And just a woman, to be honest, man. I've known her for quite some time. We've bumped into each other and connected at various stages of my life. And it is by no coincidence that she is the first guest on The Playhouse. If you know, you know. I know some people are looking and like, what? She has come in front of the screen. She's more comfortable being behind the scenes. Absolutely. And she has done a lot. When I'm telling you a lot, I'm talking about in entertainment. I'm talking about in the private sector. I'm talking about in the public sector. And I don't even want to let it out. I want her to be able to tell her story in the holistic way that we do right here on CTA. So you got to keep watching if you want to know her story. But I promise you, it is not by coincidence that she is the first person that we are having this conversation with. Sellah, I've been talking too much, so let me just do what I do, which is the intro, and then we kick this off. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for none other than Sellah Bogonko. Budget need tight and we do our own sound effects, and I'm with Manda here. So Sellah, welcome to CTA.
Thanks Richie.
This has been a long time coming.
I almost called you A-Star, but yeah, Richie. Yeah,
it's okay. A-Star, by the way, is also my name, Matthew 5:16.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so you can call me A-Star, Richie, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
So I'm not wasting any more time. Let's kick this thing up from the very beginning. And the first question that I like asking on CTA is, let's start the story from birth. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about your childhood, where you were born, what your family structure. Aha.
All right, so first of all, thanks for having me. It's taken quite a bit to get me here, so I pray that God actually is glorified in this process, otherwise it would be in vain for me. So
I love that beginning.
So my name is Sellah Bogonko, born in Kisii, stayed there for a few years and then moved to Nairobi, which we'll get to. I'm the third born in a group, in a family of 6. We're 6 of us, children, at least the ones who are born to my parents, because we're that family that used to have cousins over, throughout. So sometimes you'd wonder, okay, how many are we really in this family? But being the third born, I was always the one who everyone would forget,
How many girls, how many boys?
So we're 3 girls, 3 boys.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, being the third one, I'd always been the one who everyone forgets. Relatives would come and they're like, so they remember the last ones or the ones after me, and of course the first ones. But somehow you get like, and then I was a good girl. So I was just like a quiet girl, in the corner somewhere. So somehow I'd always be forgotten. And I think that in a way sort of like began to shape who I am in terms of this whole thing about me being very private, very in my space, in my world. But in a negative way for many people, especially those middle borns, there's a way it can dent your identity. It can dent the kind of person that you become because you sort of like get lost in the crowd. So for me, I think that is an important thing to say because that's a foundation in which God began to build my own identity outside of just being a third born, outside of being forgotten by everyone. You know, people would come and say, oh, by the way, and who's this, you know? So
can I ask, in terms of firstborn and secondborn, is it boy, girl, or just, I want to understand.
So there's boy, girl, me, and then girl, the last born according to my father, and then 2 boys after that. So, like I said, the firstborns were very, you know, animated, and we were all spaced out in 2 years. So it's like a Kadoremi sort of family.
Proper family planning happened.
When we were in primary, we were all in primary. When we were in high school, like 4 of us were in high school, or 3 of us were in high school at some point. So it was a very nice like environment to grow up in. But at the same time, like I said, there was the characters that, and I'll speak about, of course, our different personalities because I sort of like had to find myself much later in life because the other ones are more gifted, like say education. My mom is a teacher, so you'd have school, like you'd go to school and then you come back home and you still have school. But she's an angel. That's the word that we normally use to describe her. My dad, on the other hand, should have gone to the army because he is the extreme opposite. You know, he's very firm. He's very guarded in terms of especially his daughters. Yeah, you know, he really was. I mean, you'd hear his footsteps, and I know people say this, but for us it was real. You know the time he's coming, or you hear the car coming, and you just figure out, okay, what have I done, or what haven't I done? So those are, you know, those are like the personalities of my dad and my mom. But in a way, I loved the environment in which we grew up because there was a lot of pressure. First of all, from just my siblings, because you know, our firstborn rather is very sharp, you know, very bright. And then my sister, my elder sister, is very, she has a strong personality, let me just say it that way. And then my younger sister is like what we call a genius. So as we grew up.
Your younger sister, Judy.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Just to give her a shout out, man. Yep.
By the way, for her, that's like a big deal. You know, she's the full sanguine.
Yep.
And then, of course, my 2 younger brothers who are, you know, I mean, they were, of course, part of the family, and they have their own sort of like strong personality, also very bright, you know. The reason I'm bringing up the issue of education is because that was like the emphasis as we were growing up. We would have performance reviews. Like you close school and you have to come, we'd have a meeting where you come with your report card and you say how you performed. And it was always tied to things that you'd get, like for every A you'd get 100 bulb, you know, something like that. And so, of course, there were those who would shine in those moments, you know, and they know themselves, you know, they would shine in those moments. And like I said, I was bright, but I was your number,
7.
No, like your number 5, you know, like, no, but you're competing with guys who are like number 1 all the time, have gotten A's in maths and all that. So there was a lot of pressure, honestly, while growing up. But like I said, that sort of pushed me to discover who I am in God. That pushed me to begin to form my own identity away from what had already been sort of like prescribed as what was important in the home environment.
Okay, so you mentioned you were born in Kisii.
Yeah.
How long were you there? Can we talk a little bit about that era of your life?
Well, it was very brief. Okay. Because back then, my mom and dad were in Kisii. Then I think my mom got transferred, and my dad as well, to Nairobi. So we then moved. So that was like 2 years for me.
Okay.
So we didn't really. Okay, then we moved to Kibera. So the guys who live in Kibera, you know, we started out in Ayani and then went to Karanja Road for the longest time. So Kibich is my home. As in,
you know, I even like when Derek saw you and Derek was like, and I was like, you know, Sellah grew up in Kibera, and you're like, what? Anaka kibabi.
Hii ni chakuoshwa.
So,
but yeah.
Yeah, and I like when you say you lived in Kibera, I would love to hear that story. So let's see. Okay, so you come to Kibera. Probably you can't even remember. You're saying you're 2 years old.
Oh, like 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
Like I said, because we were around about the same age, you know, because all of us, I mean, like 2 years apart.
Yes.
So you're sort of like in the same age bracket. When we moved to Kibera, I mean, my memory is very, but basically it was an environment where it was exciting for me because, you know, the days of playing bladder and bano and those things are real for me because that's how we grew up. And then it was in an estate environment. So you're many of you at that age.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the first school that you go to?
I went to, my mom used to teach in Olympic, and Olympic when Olympic was Olympic. So guys, very many celebrities that I know right now actually, who went through Olympic actually know my mom because she taught them. She taught many of the guys who went through Olympic at that time when it was like the school to go to. But so 3 of us went to Olympic, and then 3 of us went to Joseph Kangeda, which was then a new public school that is in the Woodley area. And
how was Olympic for you? So that's why you did, you started your class 1.
I didn't go to Olympic, thankfully, because my mom was the one teaching there, so you can imagine the pressure. I went to Joseph Kangeda Primary School, but unfortunately my dad was in the board, and he felt like that was his day job. So he'd always drop us and then, you know, like stay, and you're wondering, okay, don't you have a job, you know? But he was really instrumental in especially laying the foundation, it being an initial, a new rather public school. But again, foundationally, for me, it was like, I enjoyed my relationship with my dad because in Olympic, I was actually the only girl there. So the other 2 went to, in Olympic.
Were you in Olympic or Joseph?
Sorry, I went to Joseph Kangeda. So in Olympic, the other 2 girls went. So this side, it was me, you know, and my eldest brother, and then the youngest brother who came a bit later. So that attention from him was good. But then it's still, I mean, you can't steal the shine from Judy. So yeah, she was always the baby girl.
So you only hear the negative side about Kibera when you hear about it. As somebody who lived in Kibera, I want to hear your version of what that was for you, your honest version.
So the truth is, Kibera, I don't know that it still is, but I think it's the largest slum in Africa. So for the longest time, it was, what people don't know is actually that Kibera has been used as a tourist destination. You know, the way guys go to Mombasa, it's always been used like that for many NGOs to go there and, you know, basically take videos of the kind of environment that people live in and all that. So we'd see that, you know, when you're growing up, but you'd never see the amount of money that has been poured there and what it's been able to do or in terms of transformation of lives, you know. So that's the Western media or the media in general in terms of portraying Kibera. But for someone who grew up there, I know it to be the thing that shaped my identity in a way, you know, because every time we'd live there, but then my dad would always push us to think beyond there, you know. And this also became much stronger for me, especially in my walk with God as I began to discover who I am and know who I am. You can start off somewhere, but it doesn't mean that you have to remain where you are, regardless of where you start. You know, for me it was Kibera, but then it could be anywhere really. And I think one of the things that my girls know about me is I constantly push myself. I never let where I am right now become like the place that I've settled for, you know, or settled on. Powerful. I always push myself, whether it's in terms of, you know, workout or in pursuit of God, which is for me the ultimate thing that I would always, you know, exert my energy, my passion in. I can never create like a monument of where I am right now. So Kibera for me was like a place where you go for training, and then after that it becomes, you know, a reference point that catapulted you into another version of yourself. But I love what you've said. Your dad was instrumental in instilling that character in you of pushing yourself out. Let's talk a little bit more about your relationship, you and your dad. I know in the beginning you've talked about the footsteps, him coming and you wondering, oh my God, but it sounds like you also had a tight relationship. If I'm not wrong, or am I wrong? I think he was tighter with the other daughters. Like I said, third born, lost in the crowd, you know, completely forgotten many times, you know. Like I said, my elder sister was the more animated one. And then she, in fact, people think that she was probably closest to my dad because they're similar in terms of character. And then, of course, the last one was just the baby girl who was completely spoiled, I think, to date. But what about in school? In school, did you feel, because there's no third born in school. In school, in fact, you all become peers. Your family shapes who you are in a way. Your environment while you're growing up shapes who you are. Because even if you go to school, you still go back home. And that sort of like builds up the character of the kind of person that you become or the kind of person that you are, if you let it. Because again, it's a choice in my view. You get to like when I discovered that, okay, you're lost in the crowd, but you can become who you want to be, because then you're not being pushed or shoved into a certain definition. You can actually get to know get to know yourself, in terms of get to know yourself in God, and then be able to mold who you want to be. And I'm grateful because my discovery of God.
That's what I was going next. You've mentioned already the word God like 72,000 times.
Yeah.
Is that then something that becomes that you find very early in life?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
In a way, initially, it was religion, honestly. And religion, I mean, just like, let me say in school, like in primary school, when you're forced to go to pastoral classes. But then there's something that was going on inside of me that kept on thinking, there has to be more to this. Okay. I was really like hungry for I felt like God became my fallback, or God became the thing that I felt, oh, okay, this one I can actually become really good at, or it can become my thing. And I got lost in that. And lost, I mean, just completely gave myself to that to date, which you will see throughout my story. Okay,
fine. So anything that you feel like you want to mention about your primary time at Joseph Kang'ethe? Or was it just the usual school, homework, back home?
Well, people don't actually know this about me, but I was very naughty in school. I was a balanced. I was like, I don't know, maybe the word is cheeky. But again, it was, I guess, I was principled in terms of extremely focused on who I am and what I want. But at the same time, I was trying to find my place, and therefore, once in a while, I'd get into trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. You weren't as polite as you appear to be.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy school? Did you enjoy Joseph Kang'ethe, or was it the thing that you had to do?
You mean, did I enjoy primary school?
Yeah.
I did because it wasn't stressful for me. The only stressful part was when you go back home and you're having to be asked, okay, how did you perform this term compared to last term? And then, of course, everyone else is giving their report card. So that moment for me was very stressful.
Okay.
But it's, like I said, it gave me a reason for me to look for my own identity in God.
Okay. I'm beginning to understand. History is so important in understanding how it shapes people to make certain decisions along their path in life.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, before we transition into maybe high school, I want to find out, what was the relationship like with you and your siblings? I've heard about it in comparison to your parents.
Yeah.
But what was the personal relationship like with you and your siblings?
I think it was good. It was really good. I think it's like we used to have our own what is it called? Because we grew up around the same age, or same like time or age bracket, like I said earlier. So we'd always go through the same issues or similar issues at the same time.
Okay.
I think for me it was exciting because we would form. I used to rap, by the way, when I was younger.
Nothing. Drop bars.
I'd give you competition. So I was a tomboy. So I was completely. I wasn't the lady or the composed chick that I am right now. I was the full tomboy. I was always more comfortable with my brothers as opposed to my sisters and all that. But in terms of growing up, we have fond memories. It's not like you're too far apart in terms of age. So we have fond memories of jokes with crack, experiences that we had that are very similar. So to date, we have things that we remember that we went through together, and they're great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's transition then now into high school. Where do you spend your 8 years in that one school?
Oh yeah.
For reals?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, where do you go next and how do you do?
I did. What do you mean? Like, what was my performance?
Yes.
You are now bringing back the memory of.
I'm just, because you've made it sound like it was such an important thing in your family.
I guess I did okay because I ended up in St. George's.
Okay.
Nice. Girls' high school, which was brilliant school, I would say.
Yes, it was. It is. Or was.
Is. I think still is.
Okay.
And I think that's when my life the definition of who I am began to take shape. But just before that, in class 8, like in between while you're waiting to be called to high school, so that's when I now got into church proper.
NPC Woodley.
NPC Woodley.
Aha.
And I think that's when my life began to, the definition of who I am began to take shape. But just before that, in class 8, like in between while you're waiting to be called to high school, so that's when I now got into church proper.
NPC Woodley.
NPC Woodley.
I
got into the worship team. I got into, not actually worship, I got into the worship team. I got into the youth ministry. And naturally I became a leader. I began to find my identity. And then
you said naturally, like you were doing that before. It wasn't naturally. I've not heard you talking about leading before. Or it was in you. When you say naturally, you mean ilikuwa ndani yako.
Yeah, like I was I'm not the kind of person, let me just say, I'm not the kind of person in a crowd to sit down. I'll probably look for what needs to be done and push the crowd forward. You understand? Like I wouldn't even wait to be given the responsibilities.
Why? Oh, you see, something that you've just brought out. Was this in you throughout high school? I mean, throughout primary?
Yeah.
This personality of you that comes out to want to lead?
Absolutely. In clubs, I'm trying to remember that I was a cop in primary school. Hey, my memory fades me. But I was definitely a natural born leader, but I feel like it sprouted a bit more that moment right after KCP into, because I actually remember that I finished my KCP on the day that, what is it called? Around about, I think that was the mocks exam, around about when the bomb blast happened.
Okay, so that's 98.
Yeah, 98.
Okay.
So that's when I finished, that was mocks, I think, because it was around August and all. But the definition, like I said, the transition into becoming a more defined version of myself started at that point. As I began to, now got into church and then got to know myself, got to realize, okay, I'm actually a leader, got to define my own like personality and character in God, rediscovering myself. And NPC Woodley gave me that platform.
When you say, now I love this. How do you find that person? Like you see, I got to that I'm hearing you repeating. How are you finding it out? What is it that you're doing that's bringing it out, or what's happening?
So when I joined church, this was like now after high school, not after high school, after primary school, I had a mentor. And like when you're now in church and then you begin to identify someone who seemed to like take interest in you. And this person really began to push me, like, what do you want to do with yourself? And I've always been to high performance, sort of like reading motivational books and all that stuff. So I think that sort of like began there when she began to push me into think about your future. Because in the church setting, or especially at that age, you're being told, okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? Are you choosing the right subject? You're going to high school, are you prepared? Things like that. So they began to sort of like give me the bedrock on which to build on into defining who I am. So the element of having someone walking with me at that time was important. Then the other thing was having a peer group for me at that time. And this has morphed over time into a different kind of experience, but I'll talk about that later. Yeah. But also having, I used to sing with your wife. Shout out to Mercy.
Here's the picture.
And a few others, some of whom that are still in the industry, others, are...
Joyce Omondi? Yes,
Joyce Omondi as well. So we at that time, it's sort of like that group started forming, as I began to find who I am. And like I said, we got into the worship team, and then of course having that accountability groups of women who are actually genuinely passionate for God and not doing it because it's the thing to do. Yeah, we'd spend hours on end in the basement just seeking God. You just go there and like a whole day, you'd be there just in worship and placing a demand on God to reveal himself to you, and we'd have experiences of God that were out of this world.
What would happen in those experiences? And this is of course throughout this whole period from when they've been in high school, but this is when it starts. This transition time that you're talking about is when it starts.
Yeah.
What are the kind of experiences that you would have that you feel shaped your life at that time?
I think, and this is into high school now, right? Because I think God began to put a fire in me for him. You understand? And the experiences I'm explaining, like, I can't even explain some of them because they were supernatural in my view. Because like by the time you're in the basement for 8 hours and you don't know it's 8 hours. Now that's creepy to some people,
Yep.
but amazing for me, because that's where the hunger for God was actually birthed. And like I said, I found the thing that defined me. I found me. It's almost like God sort of like devalued everything else and pointed me towards himself, and I found myself in him.
You know, while you've said something so powerful, you said he devalued everything else. Basically, you're saying everything that you had put value or that had been put on you in terms of people's perception. For example, Kibera can have a certain perception on how people look at you and the kind of dreams that you should have.
Yeah.
Good and bad, you removed them out
Yeah.
of you and you began seeking this God.
Yeah. One of the things that, just to mention, my dad and mom did was while we lived in Kibera, we never, I don't know how to say it, but I never felt like we did, in the sense of the kind of pressure you're put under to be a better version of yourself, to think of yourself differently. It was almost like you're there for training. I don't know how to explain it. You're there for training, or you're not consumed by your circumstances. This doesn't define you. You can either choose to say this is who I am, or you can choose to say I'm here and I'm working towards this version of myself. So that mentality was instilled in us.
By your parents?
By my parents. My mom in particular would say seasons always change. Like, for sure, you can be guaranteed. You know the way seed time and harvest, scripture say that seasons will actually change, regardless whether it's a season that you think is great right now. You actually can go into a greater season. If you think it's a bad season, definitely a good season is coming. It's that awareness of nothing is permanent. In fact, I remember at some point when something happened and my dad had gone through a process and we went through an auction process. Like I came home and I found stuff had been taken. And the way my mom was behaving was like nothing had happened, And when my dad now explained to us what had happened and the thing that he had just gone through, and now, it was a couple of weeks and then things were restored. But that thing opened my eyes to see the kind of person my mom was. Like for her, nothing changed. It's almost like, can you eat, can you sleep? Like focus on what's important, And at that point, she wasn't even as strong in her faith as she is right now. But I could tell that I'm glad she was my mom, because she wasn't fixated on this has happened to us. She just kept her eyes
on. Woe to me, woe to us.
Yeah, and my dad was like, can you focus on your education? I'll sort out the rest. You just focus on what's needful. And that's just to emphasize that regardless of the seasons, because people go through stuff. And sometimes you get lost in the storm, thinking that this is all there is to you, or this is the end of everything. But it doesn't always have to be like that, especially when you choose to know God through that process, when you choose to insist that God is revealed to you through that process. It strengthens you rather than destroys you.
I'm loving this already, because what you're saying, what you're telling me right now, and we'll come to that a bit later, I've seen you transition from good to great, when I was wondering why on earth are you living this that appears to be great, but I'm realizing this is mentality that was formed in you at such in early days. Also, by the way, just from what you've just shared, big ups to your parents. Like, that's amazing, the kind of values that they were instilling in you at such a young age. Okay, let's transition. Let's talk about high school. Yeah.
Now, for me,
1999,
Form 1, St. George's High School.
Yeah.
The
Dennis
girls'
Pritt.
high school, Dennis Pritt, Now, that's where another level of God was introduced to me. I remember in second term, actually.
So at this time, you've given your life to Christ.
Yeah. But
from an understanding of you've given your life to Christ.
Yes.
Okay.
But in high school is when I realized that was like child's play. What I had just experienced of God was child's play, because now he took me to another level, and my walk with God has always been incremental. Now, at this point, I remember we went for a challenge weekend, if you remember. Okay, you went to those are that kind of schools,
but
so
I
you have no idea what I'm saying.
No, as a rapper, I went to them. I understood them.
Yes, so I remember this particular day, we went to Highway Secondary School for our challenge weekend. I don't remember anything else about that school, but I remember we were like thousands of us. And at some point, Pastor Wesley Ngu was the one who was preaching before he now joined CITAM at the point. And I remember at this particular point, he asked everyone to line up. Like there was, those weekends were like Holy Ghost experiences, you know, like just amazing supernatural experiences with God. So I remember that day, we were told to line up and he was praying. And at this point, because I had just gotten an introduction of God, I was genuinely hungry for him. And I remember that day, I don't even remember praying. I just stood there and I know I was flowing with God or accepting whatever, you know, we were being introduced to in terms of the knowledge of God. And the next thing I knew, we were all on the ground, or at least I was, you know, and I was so filled with the Spirit that like everyone around me, for almost like 2 or 3 weeks when I went back to school, it was crazy. Like now, you know the way the handkerchief for, you know, Peter, you become like an extension of the presence of God. I had this amazing baptism of the Holy Spirit, and where I now began to hear God clearly.
Oh.
I would hear people's thoughts. I would hear his voice so clearly. It's almost like he baptized me into an introduction of the Spirit of God that was insane in my view. And that like shifted me to know there's actually more to God than what I had experienced at the time.
This is Form 1.
Form 1. And in St. G, as we call it, we used to rather, I don't know what they call it nowadays, but in St. G is also the place where I was so immersed in God. We didn't even have a worship team at the time. So I introduced the worship team in St. George's because at the time it was the CU committee that used to lead worship.
Yes.
So I separated that and created a worship team, and then that became...
And you're Form 1? Or
this is like now
okay.
End of Form 1 into Form 2.
Yes.
And there's a way that God gave me favor with the ones that were older than me, you know. People that I still meet today, you know, like Sheila and other people who are much older, like in the CU committee. But it's like because of what God was doing with me, there was an attraction. I was so hungry. It's almost like you're being paired with the mature ones because your hunger is on another level. So that was my experience in high school, getting to know God. I was deep into Christian Union. Like I said, having supernatural experiences. And then again, in high school is where I was part of this worship team. Again, there was a worship team, and then there was a music team of sorts that I formed where we were 12 of us. And again, it was a group of young women where we just pray and seek God and sing
this
together.
This is outside or inside school?
Inside school.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, to date, women that absolutely love God and are passionate for him. So it's like God used to create these cocoons for me of similar women who are, because that hunger, that accountability is important to keep your hunger going.
Yeah.
As you have your walk with God, he will always bring people around you who will keep you going and keep the fire going.
That's funny because that's exactly where you still are till today.
Yeah.
But there's I pick up words that people say as they talk.
Yeah.
So I keep hearing you say, I formed. In beyond the spiritual side of this thing, this is showing the character perspective of leadership, or the character traits of leadership and the person who takes initiative. Were you doing that in other things?
I was, but you know, like now in high school, that's what consumes your time. But then when I'd go home over the holidays, I would always be part of the youth group or the youth ministry, and also part of the worship team. So I don't know how, but God always would give me those like leadership responsibilities. Now I know it was part of pushing me to walk with him, because I realized that I had gotten into this pattern where I would do things because I'm hearing a voice. I'm hearing a voice like drawing people into this thing. And once, like for example, the worship team in church, like I told you, with the girls, the 5 of us that were singing, or in high school, it wasn't just women that just came together because we wanted to hang out. I'd hear names, you know, like this person, this person, this person. And how you know that it's God talking to you is the fruit of your obedience. That as you come together, the thing that he begins to build, it cannot be a figment of your imagination.
You're not that clever.
You're not that clever. And then the fruit itself shows because of the things that God was doing through the different platforms that to date, everything that God allows me to form, I can see the evidence, you know, like when scripture says that wisdom is justified by her children, the thing that God leads me into, I always know it's God by reason of everything that happens thereafter.
Yeah.
He always shows up. Yeah.
Well, I have so many questions. Let me start with the one maybe that peer group would want to understand.
Yeah.
You're a beautiful woman. Boys, like you sounded like you were just in God at this time.
Oh, first of all, I was.
And that beauty will be justified from a human perspective later on in your story.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to say, like, you are literally, when guys' hormones and all of these other things are happening, you're just in God.
Okay, let me tell you something that happened to me, which helped me. And it's almost like God put a leash on me in a way, or put a guard around me. So in that transition between primary school and high school, that waiting period, because of the accountability group, first of all, we were being watched over in NPC Woodley, like these are eggs, you know. There's a way that we were treated that was focused on, like, guard yourself. And then it's almost like I had been elevated together with the girls that I mentioned.
Yep.
We had been elevated to such a place, like, you're the role model, so you better get it right. So at that point, there was no even thoughts of boys, because you already know that's a distraction at that age.
Yes.
Then when I went to
high
school, the more I began to know God, the more I began to feel I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Okay.
And I would pray that whoever comes into my life as my husband or as the man that God would permit to walk with me in this journey would have to understand who I am. Would have to, almost like they would have to help me protect this thing that I had found in God. Because it wasn't just having an experience with the Spirit. I was beginning to know Him. And I was beginning to know Him for real, not for fake, like almost like a person. So I didn't want to lose that. And I knew that for some reason, there was this thought in my head that marriage is the one thing that can take you away from God or build you into God. So if you get married to the wrong person, you're done. And if you get married to the right person, then they build you into who God wants you to be.
That is, you're talking about things that even people don't understand as they're getting married. That having that understanding at that age, because remember, we're talking about you being in high school.
Yeah.
That is wisdom that proves that you are with God, because that's wisdom that only He can give you, to have that kind of thought process.
Absolutely. And one of the things that has continued with me to date, especially in that area, was when God allowed me to see the life of Paul, for example. That there was levels that the apostles had walked in with Christ, like the physical form of Christ. And there's a level in God that was higher, that was deeper, that was more, that Paul began to introduce, even if he came later. But he sort of like had to go through a process of sacrifice in terms of a different pathway with God altogether. Yep. And the honest truth is, at some point, for many years, I didn't understand my process with God until I realized that He was so targeted towards me. He was so deliberate with me. And He was so determined that I would get it right in Him, to the point where the effects of society and the pressures became so like an entity for me. Because any girl or any woman that would go through the process, especially at that time, the in thing was getting letters, from boys, especially for us, like from Sunshine. Those are like when you get letters from a certain level, you're like, and we know who is who from Upper Hill, yes, from, those kind of schools, you'd know you've arrived. But then when God begins to narrow your vision on Him, I knew in high school that there was something that He was doing with me in just the way He would restrict me in my dealings with people. Like, we would be friends. I mean, there are many people to date who are like the creme de la creme of the guys at that time. But somehow, it was just like genuine friends. And I realized with time that they respect you because of that.
Whew, this is, I just before we move on from this conversation, the loneliness thus then comes with that. You're in a different maturity in terms of your understanding to your peers. Unfortunately, when you're elevated, there are benefits that come with that. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that, and how is it not lonely? And how, are you getting what I'm sort of trying to allude to?
It's only lonely when you realize, or when you think that it's a thing to have. Like, for example, I don't drink. Now, someone who drinks would feel like they're missing out on something if they're asked to not drink. But for me, being asked not to drink, or if that's a thing placed on me, I'm not missing out on anything. You get?
Not even from the relationship perspective, in the understanding where your mental is with God, your peers, are they doing the same thing that you are constantly doing?
Now, interestingly, for the most part, no. But then God would always bring one or two people to walk with you who have the same understanding. Like, for example, in the Woodley group, we all knew that there was a demand placed on us to live a different kind of life. So even, and this I think and I believe was birthed from our experiences with God. There's a way you can have a...
Chosen from the called all know.
Yeah, you know, there's a way that you can have a genuine experience with God that literally changes you. And you can have religion or just the whole thing of just going to church for the sake of it and, you know, ticking boxes. But there's no way you can have a genuine relationship with God and it doesn't change you. And it doesn't place a demand on you. A demand especially of things that you want. Now for me, it was in that area where I would be forced to guard my heart as far as you know, the whole relationships with guys are concerned.
Okay. Last question about this era or season that you're in at that time. How do you know it's God? I love that we started with this conversation and this interview, because we are going to have to, you're going to talk a lot about this when we enter career, when we enter things that you've done. You're going to keep bringing this aspect of God has told me. At this time, you're forming this relationship with God, you're hearing his voice. How do you know it's him? Okay,
first of all, back then, it was trial and error. And that's the beauty of knowing God in terms of experientially, so that it's like going to the gym. You build muscle, but you only build muscle as you keep practicing, you know? So there are times I would be like, okay, I thought that was God, you know, I heard him clearly. And it sort of like becomes clearer. And it's like the way you can be in a relationship with someone. You get to know them as you spend time with them, to the point where sometimes they won't even have to talk. You already know what their position is over something, but it's been formed over time. So even with God, especially at that age or at that stage of high school, because I was having strange experiences with God, I can't even say some of them because I feel like they were supernatural. Sometimes I would have experiences that they would have to come and pray with me because I'm hearing things of, you know, stuff that is about to happen. And at that age, because you're still young in your walk with God, you don't fully understand. But then having someone else there who knows exactly what you're going through helps you to be able to form a confidence. It's more like Eli and Samuel, you know? Samuel kept on hearing God's voice and he's thinking, what am I hearing? And he's thinking it's Eli who's calling him. Yeah. But then when Eli is there to say, when he calls you the next time, say, here I am, Lord, speak, your servant is listening. So you need that kind of, I had that kind of guidance from one or two people that helped me understand what God was doing with me, because it was strange at the time. And I didn't know it was him, but I got to know him with time. Okay,
so do you want to be a pastor at this time? It's like, career-wise, what are you thinking? Okay, I'm hearing all these things. We're in school. What's the path after?
My dad thought I would be. Amazing thing is, you remember when I say that I didn't have a place, or I didn't have a strong place in the family? This became my thing. Like, even when now we'd have meetings, I'd be the pastor to pray. I'd be the, you know, suddenly it's like that became my thing in the family. Did I ever think of being a pastor? Not really. I knew that God would use me, and I knew that God had amazing stuff in store for me. But the most I thought of was going to Bible school because I was really hungry. In fact, I remember in high school, you know, when guys would wake up in the morning and you're, you know, getting ready for preps, or rather for breakfast and then preps. For me, I'd wake up in the morning to study like God's word, and I'd hear what scripture to study. It was like I was in my own training as I'm in high school, you know. So before breakfast, I'd spend time with God, go for breakfast quickly, then go down, go to, you know, what we used to call down to the tuition area, spend time with God. And I remember those are the moments that built my hearing and my understanding of God. I'd immerse myself. If I'm not reading, I'm actually doing something, either praying or something like that. And for 4 years, that really built my my personal walk with God.
Gee, I can imagine.
Not being a pastor, but being an amazing woman of God.
And did he begin to tell you the plans that he had for your life? You know that verse that we always like say, for I know the plans that I have for life. But also, that verse continues to say, you will seek and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Yeah. Jeremiah 29:13, which is what sounds like what you were doing.
Richie, I think the summary of my life, and I know we're not at summary yet, is the more I got to know God for myself, the more I realized, oh my God, there is so much to him that we haven't even known yet. And it's not what people tell you. It's better when you actually experience it for yourself. Because right now, no one can come and tell me that God doesn't exist. Because I've had so many experiences with him. I'd have visions, even in high school, of things that have happened. And I'll tell you like one, for example. I used to have a dream of having a national worship experience where guys would come and they'd be before God. Because you see, he had been training me using worship. And in 2014, just before 2014, and I know I've skipped a bit, but just before 2014, one of the things that God kept on putting in my spirit is that, like, he brought it back. This is like a few years later. He brought it back to me that you need to now do this thing. And then someone walks up to me and tells me, McDowell wants to come to the country, or rather, I've gotten this connection with McDowell, and I think you should do it. So in my head, I'm like, first of all, I mean, I know I hung out with the A-stars and all those people in the music industry, but there was no reason for me to do it. But God brought back that picture of what he used to show me in high school. And I said, okay, I don't have the money. I don't know how to go about this. And for some reason, when I got in touch with the manager and with him, somehow we just connected when I began to share with him my story. And by the time he was coming, we didn't charge. It was an amazing worship experience. And that for me was birthed from things that God had shown me beforehand. So it wasn't just a concert or hosting an international artist. It was a fulfillment of something that God had shown me. And I did it without having the credentials, so to speak. It was an amazing experience for me, not just in terms of the worship, but the journey to speaking to him coming to the country, the experience that we had, and the thing that he then did in the industry after that. Okay.
Let's talk about then transitioning out of high school into not becoming a pastor, or into what's next.
What next?
Yes.
I wanted to do something in finance. This is also important, actually. So you know that gap year between high school and when we used to wait to be called to campus. So my dad forced me to go and do accounting. It was the thing to do. In our time, there was things that you needed to do, IT and then accounting.
And
everyone had
license.
A driver's license. And he forced me to go to Strathmore. And I was like, first of all, I hate accounting because of just the routine nature of debit and credit. I found it so boring. I wasn't the kind of person to do something routine. But I wanted to be a finance director, and that is what I had told him. So he said, you'll need accounting, so just go and do it. So I went and did it. And it was such a drag for me because I just didn't enjoy it. But then, at this time, I'm still discovering myself and figuring out, okay, what do I do with myself?
And what year is this now? Like 2000 and?
Hey, 2004.
Okay.
Yeah, 2004. So you're asking me the transition between high school and campus, right?
Yes.
So during that gap year when we used to wait to be called into campus, I had been called to Egerton. And the moment I got that letter, I was just like, no, I am not going to Egerton. And the only reason I had was because I had now become so active in church that, I'd go for Kesha on Friday, go home, maybe sleep like 2 hours, go and practice for worship team, leave in the evening at 6 p.m., be in church for all the 3 services. So my life that was my weekend.
Yes.
And I figured I didn't want to lose that because I felt that was my way of serving God. So when the letter came, I told God, no, I'm not going to Egerton. And I asked God to open a door for me to go to KU in particular, because I wanted to be in a place where I could come back of the weekend to do what I was still doing.
Okay.
It's like he honored the desire that I had to be available to serve him in the way that I had been doing. And that's how he opened the door for KU. So for me, KU was not just another university, it was an answered prayer to give me the opportunity to continue doing what I had been doing.
And KU comes after Strath.
Yes, so I did accounting in Strathmore, and it was a drag. I didn't want to do it, but one of those things that God uses, because when I now went to campus, the first 2 years of business courses, most of them were accounting, and I was acing them like a problem. So sometimes the thing that you don't want to do and you feel like is a process for you to go through is a thing that God might use or will use to be able to accelerate you beyond what you think. So
I love that. And what were you studying in KU?
I did a BA Econ and Sociology.
And why? And why are you taking those courses up?
First of all, I'm grateful because it was a very easy way of achieving what I wanted, because I wanted to go into the business world. I had always seen myself as a corporate girl. So I knew that this would give me, if it was not become, it was this. So this was for me a good way to get into that space.
Did you take up leadership mantles in KU?
No, KU was strange for me because it was a huge environment. And again, I found myself with these two friends of mine who somehow played an amazing role, you know, Naserian and Leah. And they played an amazing role in just pushing me to something that I never thought I would do. So there was the academic side, and that was my focus. But somehow, when we were in first year actually, we're just new in campus, you know, this is like our third semester or something. And one of the evenings they trick me and tell me, we'll take you somewhere. So we go and we get into this place, and they had registered me for Miss KU. And I said, I'm not doing that. Like, do you know who I am? I sing in church, I wear long skirts. Like, at what point does modeling come in, you know? And I literally sort of maneuvered my way out of it. No, the first year they told me about it. The second year, when now they were doing auditions, they tell me we are going out to this club thing. We want to go and see what people are doing. Yeah. And I find myself in a place where I'm seeing girls catwalking, and I look at them and I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. And they had already briefed the lady who was in charge. So she said, oh, Sellah. And she called me and she put me in the line and told me, okay, just walk. Let me see how you walk. And the next thing I knew, I had just been, you know, sort of thrust into this thing that I didn't want to do, because I'm a very private person naturally. I didn't want to do, I wasn't interested. It was very, very wrong in my head. And that night, it's like somehow she just told me, you don't have to commit, just do. And the moment I started walking, I was like, I enjoyed it, you know? But then I was like, this doesn't fit into the picture of who I am. You know, the church girl, the prim and proper. In my view, modeling was a very, you know, no-go zone and all that stuff. So
it's modeling next to the club. Modeling the club.
It was just wrong.
Who goes same WhatsApp group.
And at this time, I had begun the practice of asking God everything, which is something that I learned from David. If you read the story of David, one of the things that strengthens his walk and his character with God or in God was the fact that he would inquire of God even when it seemed obvious. So example is when Saul had died and it was obvious that he should be the one taking over, because this is the thing that he had lived for. But he goes to God and says, should I now go and take over one of the cities of Israel? And God says, yeah, you can go. And then say, which one in particular? Like, you want to be so smack in the middle of God's will as opposed to just going with, you know, the flow. And that's how I believe one of the things that made God call him a man after his own heart, because you're not just interested in doing for the sake of doing, you're actually interested in doing exactly what pleases him. So by this time I had begun to
First of all, that's so powerful, and thanks for sharing that. I've just been reading, and sidetrack, I've been reading Noah. And the very strangest thing happens if when you read that story. Puts his hand out, bad goes, bad comes back. Puts his hand out again, bad goes, bad comes back. Third day doesn't come back. He chills 7 days and then opens up something, but he still asks God. And God tells him, I'm like, you've already got all the signs and proofs that you needed. Why are you bothering to ask? But I hadn't looked at it from the perspective of that's a man who God looks after his own, who God sees
as a man after his own
exactly
heart. For me, I think the thing that has strengthened my knowledge of God is that thing of asking, because we underestimate the interest that God has in us getting it right. Many times we use wisdom, we use what is obvious, you know, even in choosing who we want to marry, what we want to name our children, you know, the careers that you want to have. And when I look at my life, one of the things that has bailed me out of amazing like situations is just that thing that you ask God, and somehow he told you, don't pick this one. It seems like the obvious one, but don't pick this one, pick this one. And then you realize there's a higher level in God that you can walk in if you choose to ask. If you don't ask, you'll always sort of like, you will stumble, you will make mistakes and discover things as you're going along. But he actually gives you shortcuts when you ask him, and then he leads you into his perfect will, which ends up making you get to know him better and give him a better sacrifice, as opposed to constantly stumbling because you're pursuing your own will. And the reason, allow me to add, the reason why many of us don't ask God is because we have presumptions in our minds. Presumptions based on what people think, what they approve of us, what society expects of us, what is already common sense. And there's a reason why it's called common sense, because it is common. It is common, and it is also communal in terms of it's a thing that everyone abides by. But anyone who wants to go far with God, you must be able to walk with him to the extent of actually asking him and engaging him in terms of the thing that he wants you to do. And I feel like that always exempts me from very many issues in life.
Okay, bye guys. We're finished with the CTA. That is so, and by the way, I'm very serious. Like, we can be done with that. Like, I love that. And that is such a huge nugget that you have given people. Myself, when I say people, I'm talking about me.
Well, I know your story, yes, including why we're here today and the journey that you've walked. So it's so powerful that can save people so many mistakes, money, pain, and a whole bunch of other things in life. So you're on this catwalk, you're enjoying it, but you're feeling a certain type of way about it. You have your own perceptions about what this thing is. Based on laws. Because I've already said a good girl is like this. Especially a godly girl who leads worship in church, is a youth leader, blah, 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 is like this. And then these girls are used by God, now I realize later, to push me into something that I was literally fighting. So when
you stepped and did, you found it natural.
I found it natural, but then I was careful, because sometimes even the thing that you enjoy may not be God for you. Because it will draw you, you'll get excited by it, but that's how sin starts. If you look at James, he says, no one is tempted by anything outside of what they already desire. Everything always starts with that nugget of, you already have the desire becomes sin, the sin now becomes manifest, and then it leads to death and all that. So, like for example, like I said, I don't drink. So even if you bring Hennessy or whatever it is that you bring before me, it will not, because there's no desire in me for drinking or for alcohol, then it's not a basis on which the enemy will tempt me. But the enemy will tempt you in areas that you already have a desire in.
I need to bring some shoes here. It's the shoes. Okay, there. But I love what you like. I'm making fun, but what you're saying is it's so...
You can't be tempted outside of what you already desire. And that's how Eve actually fell. Like for her, at that point, I believe she was already maybe having maybe premeditations or thoughts around, why would God actually tell us not to eat this thing? The more you hang around that thing, the more it will become a basis of temptation for you. And by the time the enemy came to ask her, did God really say? It sort of like just fed into the thing she was already creating room for.
You're looking for the yes.
You're looking for the yes and the approval, which will always come if you hang around long enough. If you're looking for a reason to do something or not to do something, the more you keep it in your mind, whether good or bad, it will always come, and it will be so easy, because then you've already created the room in your mind for that thing to happen.
Okay, that's powerful. So what happens? This thing, you said you then asked God about this. So
I went back and I was asking God, okay, modeling, Sellah, the picture that I have, they don't go together. And that's when he began to teach me about liberty. Liberty in terms of the knowledge of God that introduces you to a side of him that tells you, rise, kill, and eat. And you're a Jew. And you believed that this is an unclean animal. Yes. So you're like, me.
In fact, you were with Jesus.
Hey.
He was your homie.
Do you know what? Like Peter said to Jesus, me, I've never eaten anything unclean. Like, I would never. And then if the funny thing is how we don't know how much we can drift away from God and say that we're walking with God is how he said, Lord. He actually said to him. So he knew it was God who was speaking to him.
Oh.
But then he responds and says, Lord, me, I've never eaten anything unclean. Like I cannot, surely. And this is God telling him to rise, kill, and eat. So that was my experience. That when God was telling me, you're actually going to do this. And then on top of that, I say, how will I know that this is you? And then he introduced me to the book of Esther and told me that, do you know the whole basis of how she got into being a queen was through a pageant. Like there were girls there. They went through a process of being selected. There was a lot of politics going on, of course. I mean, being queen, that's a position of influence. So imagine the maneuvers that were being done to get the right girl who was politically correct to get into that position. But God uses that opportunity to introduce himself to a nation that was actually heathen, to make room for her. Now, at this point, God had already begun to feed my mind with thoughts about the nation now in terms of Kenya. I just would not sleep or rest. And this is now from high school, I forgot to say that. I began to just have this burden for Kenya. Like in church, when I would lead worship, we'd be speaking about healing, we'd be speaking about revival, and for some reason, I'd just have to say something about Kenya as I'm leading worship or make a prayer. So I knew that there was something that God was tugging in my heart about Kenya. So back to modeling, he takes me through the book of Esther, and not just reading, but he began to show me how to dress, what to do in terms of now how to engage in that pageant.
So, first and foremost, I love that you've explained that you were in high school training your ear to hear God. So now that's where it's not. I'm not saying you're not doing it anymore, but at least you've got an understanding of when you hear his voice, you're not asking, "Hey, is that you?"
Yeah.
You already know it's him.
I knew it was him.
Hence why when this opportunity came to you, you decided, let me first find out if my God is in tune with this.
Yeah.
But then, what are you doing? Is it praying that you're doing with him? Are you alone in your room? Like how are you engaging him, and how are you hearing these things?
It's not okay. First of all, I really did used to spend a lot of time in prayer because I was still like discovering, like I was still growing in my walk with God. But that prayer, just to say, was for my husband. Like I used to spend a whole lot of time because I knew that this thing that God is molding and increasing in me, the only thing that would break it was not a career, was not anything else. It was the man that God would allow to come into my life. And I knew the moment that happens, it would be a make or break for me. So I always tell my girls, I would spend maybe out of 7 days, 4 days fasting and praying. God, don't let me get it wrong. Not in this area. And that would be my cry, that would be my prayer, that would be my, all that. So back to modeling, because this is still in campus, I was doing that. So you see, God is not dealing with me in compartments. So the same girl who's praying about her husband is the same girl who's also being introduced to modeling, and I'm like, what? But the moment I got a green light from him, it was a go for me. Yeah. Because the floodgates now began to open in terms of my mind, understanding what Esther went through, why she went through it, how it was tied to the nation and all that. And God was still training me to get to know him in ways that it's almost like discovering God in places that you wouldn't think he is. So he was opening my mind to what I would call liberty, the liberty of the spirit, where he can lead you into places, like I said, where you least expect, but you find God there. And so for me, modeling, and I would say that church, there was just one person or a couple of people, but like 2 or 3 pastors in particular who stood with me because they were like youth pastors, they understood. Like the Wagatas for me played a significant role in my life. And they really stood with me to say, you're actually, if you've had God, because they had known me for a while and they knew that I didn't just do anything for the sake of doing it. So they emphasized in my life that if you've had God and you're clear, we'll back you. In fact, they even came for the pageant.
You needed the backing because what you were doing was unconventional for the role and space that you were playing in church.
I was already getting backlash because there was the question of, okay, so when it comes to bikini, what will you do? When it comes to modeling, because now after that you begin to get like, what are they called? deals, you know, to endorse
endorsement
different kind
deals,
of
yes.
things, gigs, even for just modeling. What will you do, you know? And for me, I didn't need to think through that because I already knew the principles by
The
which
values.
God taught me. It's not even values in terms of that I don't or do. It's that he was introducing me to, if I say you go, you go. It's not a function of what people approve or what people don't approve. Because that's a thing that normally can hinder you from hearing God, because you're waiting for the approval of men. And yet those men are not hearing God. They don't know what is right. They're probably struggling in their own walk with God. But when God tells you to do something, that's when he began to reinforce it in me. You do it.
And God's yes to you can be God's same no to somebody else.
Absolutely.
He can say two different things to two different people.
Precisely.
This is so good. Wow. God, thank you first of all for letting us start with Sellah, but I'm enjoying this.
So I'm going through the modeling process.
So now
he's introducing
you get an
me.
acceptance, and you are. I mean, what I mean is internal acceptance of, let's do this.
Yeah.
And you begin to submerge yourself. This guy even begins to give you traits and
ideas.
And I say that
like I remember,
it's God.
he began to give me precisely tricks and ideas. Even like for my last costume, there was this thing that he gave me, like a whole picture, and I feel like that was the thing that made me win that particular night, because it was the last outfit and it was supposed to be like your wow outfit. And I don't even know how to explain it, but basically it was a dress with fire. So I don't even know how I came up with that, but I know it was like an inspiration from God. But the thing that I would like to emphasize is God wasn't so much interested in the pageant. He was interested in molding me. It's like David. You've been called to be a king, but he takes you through processes where you have to get to know him. In that what do you call it? In that cave, when you're still alone and people come to you and say, okay, you're the one who's going to lead us. Or when you have to learn, okay, do we go to war? How do we fight this battle? And then this time he tells you, don't use the same tricks as last time. Use this other one. That's actually a training by God in the wilderness or in the process of, in your walk with God, that is, in my view, the most valuable thing that anyone can actually give you, because that's how you get to know God for yourself in a way that no one else can come and tell you that, by the way, Richie, this is how God is. That will be an addition, but you have your own experience with God.
The pageant was a tool to sharpen you.
Yes, in my hearing God, in my knowing him, in my discerning him, and then in my going against the will of men to what God has ordained for me to do. And that was just Miss KU, because then it ushered me into something else.
So yeah, even like CTA, we take things slow. You will notice, you'll understand why you're here for a minute, and your story is, it's so rich. That's why I'm loving it. So there's something that you've said, because I feel like this is one of the biggest hindrances for human beings.
Yeah.
The perception of other human beings.
Yeah.
You ends the acceptance, especially when you begin to excel in a thing, you get a lot of acceptance. And then now you have to deviate, to grow to the next thing, you sort of have to, so let me use your story. I'm trying to figure out how your mindset dealt with this. So you are doing well in church, you're the girl who prays, you're the girl who's there serving, you're the girl who's there worship leading, you're leading other women. For that reason, people are like, this is a wonderful woman of God, let's mold her. But you can then now decide to do this thing, which is the pageant, with God's acceptance. In fact, God's leading you in that. How are you able to let go of the perception of man? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Okay, like I said, by this time I had built a confidence in God's voice in a way that I knew when he says something, I would rather die doing it than get the approval of men. Because first of all, those men will also change their minds the following day. The same people that clap you into a position will actually tear you down the following day. And we all see it on social media. Today we celebrate someone, and the following day we tear them down like we didn't say the things that we said yesterday. So I've never been one to wait for the approval of men, and I think that that's where God began to reinforce it in me. And then of course, having certain voices that God used to affirm me helped in that season. Because first of all, my parents were like, okay, have you cleared it with the church? I remember my dad and my mom were concerned at the beginning. Then, because they had begun to know who I am, and when I say that I've actually had God, they knew, okay, this one is not a normal thing. They just backed me. In fact, they're like, okay, what do you need?
Nice.
And with time, it's like the way dreads used to be in church. there's a time that someone who has dreads is like the devil himself. But nowadays, it's not a big deal. But you see, you don't have to wait for people to get to the place of getting comfortable with what God is saying for you to actually do it. Sometimes people are called to be first fruit expressions, which means that you will walk a journey. It will be lonely, but it's your discovery of God that will open a door for other people to walk in.
I like that, fast fruit expressions. Yeah. Okay, so you win this thing. You become Miss KU.
Yeah.
Second year.
Yes. And from there, God introduces me to this lady who passed
How
on.
was that, first and foremost?
Okay, sorry.
Were you like, okay? I don't like the way you moved on the story, but were you shocked? Were you like, oh my?
Honestly, it was an anticlimax for me, because I was like, okay, so then what? Like, just like that. So you become but the thing about KU is that they would give you privileges. You'd get your own room, things that were important, at that level. Yeah. You'd get special invitations, special seats,
Bursaries?
No, but you wouldn't pay for accommodation. So some costs would be sort of like deducted for you. And then, of course, you become popular, which is now the beginning of the contrary side of who I am. Because I was like, what the hell is this, But that began to introduce me into the whole thing about being elevated to a certain position, but being mindful that the elevation you're at, like Esther, don't forget why you're there. Don't forget the process that started this. First of all, it was not your brilliant mind that said, go for Miss KU.
Yes.
So it means that God did have a reason for bringing you there. So I was consumed by, what is this reason that he has?
At that time, you didn't know what it was.
I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
I knew, okay, Lord, it just happened. So what are we doing? So I meet this lady who became like my mentor in campus, and she was just like a mother, just overly concerned about me. And I'll mention something that she taught me or trained me at that point. And so she asked me, so what project do you want to do as Miss KU? And I came up with this idea of, I wanted to go help girls in Samburu, to go to school instead of getting married early and all that. And I remember she calmly told me, sweetie, that's a really nice idea. It's brilliant. I mean, it's commendable. It's noble. Then she said, but it's not doable. So I meet this lady who became like my mentor in campus, and she was just like a mother, just overly concerned about me. And I'll mention something that she taught me or trained me at that point. And so she asked me, so what project do you want to do as Miss KU? And I came up with this idea of, I wanted to go help girls in Samburu, to go to school instead of getting married early and all that. And I remember she calmly told me, sweetie, that's a really nice idea. It's brilliant. I mean, it's commendable. It's noble. Then she said, but it's not doable. You have to be able to have something. Think about it. When will you be in class, and when will you be in Samburu? How will you be able to do that? And she was trying, at that point, she taught me a valuable lesson of, you started this thing by asking God. Why don't you ask him what he wants you to do, rather than just picking up an idea of something that you want to do? So that reminder, again, like I said, surrounding yourself with people who, you would know this. It's people who you have told, God told me. And then they say, okay, so the one who told you, make sure that you're building on that rather than taking away from it because of introducing flesh or introducing your own concept of what this thing is about. And that's what Esther's mistake was. Because the minute she got into that position, she forgot. She probably now started getting used to the perfumes and the treatments of being queen, and forgot the reason why, until Mordecai, someone that God used, came to her and triggered her to remember, by the way, God is the one who put you here, and the reason he put you here those many years ago has come. And so you have to awake to the reason why he brought you, and then get with the program, as opposed to being consumed by your own process and comfort.
So do you figure out what it is? So does that send you back to God to then be like?
It did.
You know what I love about your life, and I just like I'm loving it. Your story should be every human being's norm story. Yeah. Those who subscribe to the faith.
Yeah.
Whatever God you subscribe to, you should be constantly going back to him to give you the instructions. And if he is truly God, he will speak to you because he loves you.
Yeah.
So you went back to God for God to be like, okay, God, what happens? Why did you make me Miss Tourism? I mean, Miss
KU
KU
at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I go to God and he points me to the story of Esther in relation to the nation. Remember, he had begun to build this desire, this fire in me about the nation. So I remember at that point, God puts it in my heart to do a 21-day prayer for the nation on radio. Now, first of all, okay, of course I was involved in, the industry in a way. I got to know you guys and a few other artists and all that. But I was like, this is not me. And this is now towards, I had sort of like walked with God for a while. And this is now towards now,
Your end of KU.
the end of KU and all that. So at that point, I'm thinking about that picture of praying for the nation. And then he introduces the Miss Tourism or Miss Kenya at the time. So I've just finished one pageant. It's been a year later and I've worked with him and all that. Then I'm introduced to this Miss Kenya thing and I'm like, okay, this is a larger platform. And again, God uses someone to actually push me into that pageant. And I knew that it was him now because I had built a pattern of checking with him. Now, Miss Kenya was a bigger platform. It was a different ball game altogether. And I knew that there's something that he was fine-tuning in me in terms of my work with him. Now, this is campus. You become like a celebrity in campus, but then now you're being thrust into the limelight in terms of the national stage. And at this point, I go through the process again. By this time, of course, church had warmed up to the idea of me modeling. I had done a few endorsements here and there, adverts and all that stuff.
Like for who had you done adverts for?
Well, I was a good girl, so hot chocolate, things that are normal, like outfits,
Yes.
just different things at the time.
But why I'm asking that is because now you start making money.
Yes, okay, there were offers for me to do certain kinds of endorsements, but like I said, because of the practice of checking with God, even the thing that was obvious, he would say no. So I would let go of it without understanding why he would say no. So again, because of that practice, especially now, after I became Miss Tourism, which was the same pageant as Miss Kenya, but I got to number 2, and I'll speak about that in a moment. It was a beautiful learning experience because you're getting attention, but at the same time, there's another restriction on you, and the restriction is God. The same person who told you get into this thing is the one telling you, okay, this one you'll go further, but this one you won't get involved in, etc. So again, still building my walk with God.
So this is when you're Miss KU. Of course, now you start getting opportunities for endorsements, this, that, the other.
So Miss KU was 2005. And then now, towards the end of 2006 into 2007 is when now I did the Miss Kenya, because it's a long process. You go through trainings and all that stuff. And then at the mid of 2007 is when now I became Miss Tourism.
Okay, let's then talk about this season. In terms of just the pageant, because now you're saying you're being thrust from community level being KU into a national level being competing against other people in Kenya.
So that was exciting for me, again, like because I had the practice of working with God, ideas of the outfits, ideas of who to collaborate with and all that stuff. So I remember I was so sure I was going to be Miss Kenya, so sure. Like it was such a close tie. The thing that I knew like separated me from the person who won was the answer that I gave. Like I was the second last person to answer, she was the last person to answer. So the answer that I gave was what I had already like meditated on, I had seen in my mind to answer. But the minute she came, she topped it up and just like said something so beautifully with me. I was like, drat, I should have thought of that, And when now it was announced, because of, remember, I had now become so consumed by this process. For some reason, I really wanted to win. When I became number 2, it was such a heartbreak for me. It actually destabilized me for a while, almost like I didn't know, because I knew it was a God process. You know the way you start assuming things, like when Moses was sent into Egypt to go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. But you go there with the mentality of, I'll go say he will release us. And God tells you, not yet. So he goes in and Pharaoh actually, God literally hardens his heart, and he has to go through another longer process of knowing God, but it was to build him in a way that we get to now read later that Moses knew his ways, but the children just knew the acts of God. But it was because of that process of walking with God and not just the magic of, I say it happens exactly as he said. So my process of the whole Miss Kenya experience sort of like threw me back to, okay, how did I not get it? Because for some reason it became the thing that I wanted in my mind. Again, perhaps God saw, your heart has gone another direction. This is not the plan. Whatever the reason is, and I know the reason now, and I'll say it much later, but it was a beautiful, I had experience at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, God actually restrained me from something getting to my head, for me thinking that now I have attained to a certain level. But there, I was honestly disappointed when I didn't get it. Yeah.
So what happens now? Because now number 2 was going to be named Miss Tourism. Was it like that, or was that a position that was created just because they're like, no, we need to give this number 2 something?
No, you remember this is 2007 into 2008. So there was because of the post-election balance, some pageants hadn't happened, so they combined all of them. And now they were under one franchise. So in that year, they combined all of them. They actually combined 3 pageants. So number 3 became Miss Commonwealth or something like that. So I became number 2, and that's how I got Miss Tourism.
So I've got now some real questions. Does that, unfortunately, the placement of Miss Kenya, Miss Tourism, Miss Commonwealth has a sex symbol attachment to it from the public perception. Do you get what I mean? Which is wrong. But does that now thrust a certain kind of phone calls? I remember when I interviewed Boniface Mwangi, he said as soon as he put people on the Pulse cover girls, MPs, MCAs, everybody's calling and asking for that girl's number. This is national level you're being thrust to as a beautiful woman. Even it can be as a beautiful woman who is of God, and it's now a nice guy deciding that's my wife. Run after, get after. What happens now with that? Or does that happen?
It happened a lot. And like I said, if I wasn't prepared, first of all, if it was my first pageant, I'd be like in, another world altogether. And then secondly, if I hadn't been grounded, because by this time you can tell that I had had such a deep walk with God. And the constant reminder, this has nothing to do with you. And I think for me, getting number 2 was also a reminder of
a reality check.
Take a step back and figure out what God is actually doing with you. It has nothing to do with all these things that you think it has. It's about in terms of the pageant and all that. There's something that God is doing, and it's a journey. It's not a destination. So it did actually refresh my mind to remember what's important. And at the same time, there was something else that was happening with me, because I had just now finished campus. And there was another whole story that was going on with me at the time, because I had, maybe I can go into it right now.
Go into it.
So,
and then you answer the question of what do you do to block. I'm just thinking of somebody.
What do I do to block?
Oh, no, somebody who may be in your situation.
Yeah.
Like now your phone call. Hi, am I speaking to Sellah? Oh, I just want to come and pick you up and take you to Dubai for shopping. With the world that we live in right now, you're laughing, but
my sister is laughing.
It's crazy. That's the world that we live in right now. Put a few Instagram photos up. Suddenly, a man with money picks up the phone, calls you. Yours was. How did you maintain this soberness, or did you maintain it? And if you fail, how did you get back up? So let me answer by addressing it and joining it with what you just said about social media as well. There's a way, a combination of my walk with God, a combination of my parents, and a combination of a real experience with God revealed to me that what you place value on is either something that is passing with time or something that will remain. So for example, like I said, you cannot be tempted of what you outside of what you already desire. So guarding your desires is actually very important. Now, at the time, I didn't know this, of course, extent of this wisdom of being able to choose what you allow in your life, etc. But the pressure for me, one of the things that helped me was the pressure from church, because I was already put on a pedestal. I was already, there was, like I said, the 5 of us at the time, the ones who used to sing together, there was pressure for us to sort of create the model that other people would follow. So you wouldn't, the things that you would deliberately cut off because here,
you'll be killed in church, you'll be killed at home, you'll be killed by the pastors who support you. So you just choose an easier pathway because of that. But the second thing I would like to say is that for me, I feel like God fungan my eyes from seeing certain things or from experiencing. And then the value that you place on yourself also determines what you allow. For example, if a guy comes up to you, and this is now for the younger girls, if a guy comes up to you, he's already judged you and graded you.
Yes.
You know the way on Twitter they say she's a 10, but you know, there's always that scale that they've put on you. Now, you're the one to confirm what they're thinking of you by responding how they expect you to respond, or you raise your game to the point that the skill doesn't matter, as in I can't fit into your skill because I'm above that. So the value you hold of yourself actually determines how people respond to you. Even if they come to you with a wrong perception, the immediate response you give already determines the direction of that thing, whether it will go on or not go on. So there are many tricks of how to go about it. And then I think in our day, I mean, for right now, rather, I think this generation is dealing with a lot more things, especially because of social media. And for me, luckily, I didn't place that. In fact, I only came back to social media recently because of my another process with God, which we'll get to. But I've never been one to, like I said, wait for people to validate me. In terms, especially my peers or what people consider to be important. Because the minute you do that, they will clap you into a position and they will tear you down the next minute. So I would say deflate that whole thing of whatever the man or the guy has placed as a value on you. You determine your value and then work for yourself. You know, determine your own value by having your own stuff or building your own value as opposed to waiting for someone else to build it. Because the reason why he's taking you to Dubai, for example, is because he thinks that that's what your price is.
But on the other hand, and I know it sounds like trivial stuff that I'm dwelling on, but I'm just thinking of people in that situation. And it's not every day we get somebody like you on this seat who has experienced and has wisdom and has come out on the other side better. Another element that unfortunately being thrust into the limelight, let's even remove the beauty perspective out. I'm talking about now proper guys who love God, who are coming and being like, I've decided on this one. She's the one. She's throwing all the characters of a woman that I would want, which is attractive to any man in terms of the values and the way you'd carry yourself. So now people, even they're not trying to they are genuinely nice guys trying to just to get you. I'm going to say acquire.
Acquire.
Right.
Property.
Wrong word. Forgive me, ladies. You get? Are you understanding?
Okay, so I guess what you're asking is how did I handle guys who are genuinely interested in me, and even if, let's say, for example, they were in the setting of church or whatever it is, right? Do you remember the time when I told you that I invested quite a bit of time in prayer? When I was not ready for marriage, for example, but I invested quite a bit of time in prayer because I knew that this is a make or break for me. And I had a lot of what I like to call close calls, you know, like guys who you're sure for sure, you know, like this guy I'm really into. But the trick that I used to use, even with my girlfriends, I'd call them like, Ebukam, there's a guy who I'm completely confused because of him.
That's great. Okay, you're not a robot. Thank God. I mean, that's what
I'd just be completely gone, you know, not able to think, function, etc. But the thing that I used to do is, regardless of that, I would go and cry before God and say how, in fact, I would use that scripture of the heart is desperately wicked above all things. Because I knew that it's very easy to love something, to desire something, and it not be God. And you even start hearing voices telling you that is God.
Okay.
So the reason I'd bring someone else is because I'd tell them the truth. You know, I'd tell them the truth of this is why I like the guy, this is my situation, but please, you know me, pray with me. And there are many times, and this is what I was saying at the beginning, we think that God is disinterested in us or disinterested in our success or in our fruitfulness, but in actual sense, he's not. He is more invested and interested than we are. So the moment I'd pray, like I remember this one, not once, not twice, but let me use this particular example, a guy that I was really into, and I remember I knew that this one, if God does not intervene, but it's a done deal, it's sealed forever.
Was it a mutual? Was it mutual? Was
it
also?
Oh. I mean, what do you expect? But and that made it harder because it's easier to like a guy who didn't like you and you're like, maybe I had God wrong. But this is now, more complicated. So So the moment I'd pray, like I remember this one, not once, not twice, but let me use this particular example, a guy that I was really into. And I remember I knew that this one, if God does not intervene, but it's a done deal, it's sealed forever.
Was it a mutual? Was it mutual? Was
Oh,
he
yeah.
also, oh.
I mean, what do you expect? And that made it harder because it's easier to like a guy who doesn't like you and you're like, maybe I had God wrong. But this is now, more complicated. So I began seeing images. I'm literally awake. There's nothing, like I'm not sleeping, it's not a dream or anything like that. But every time I think of the guy, I'd see images of him holding me and stabbing me at the back. And he'd wear like a black cape or something. And I'd say, God, what is this I'm seeing? Until someone else came to tell me that this is what they saw about someone who was hugging me. And for me, when I'd see them, I'd see the face, so I'd know who it was.
Yes.
Now, God would use stuff like that to confirm to me that, chick, you're heading the wrong direction. So the onus would be on me to cut it off. Like the way when God spoke to Abraham and said to him, I want you to sacrifice your son.
Yes.
Your son, your only son, the one you love. Not Ishmael, not the one that you just got because... Not those other extra servants who serve you, the one that you love. And again, that was one of the training grounds for me when God would teach me to give up something that I want, so that the enemy, John 14:30, that says that, so that when the enemy comes, he finds nothing in you. Like I said, desire is what actually makes you fall. So the moment you're able to sacrifice the thing that you want to God, he'll either give it back to you, but now it has a proper place in your life, or he will remove it. But many of us mess up or go down the wrong way because we deal with a desire too late. Remember I said that for me, the moment I knew I started having feelings for the guy, before it grows into anything that can be called anything, I ran to God. And many times I'd find myself crying before him, like, oh, Lord, you know my heart. Me, I'm so gone. I really, but I want your will. So he always, he never fails. He always came through.
Thank you for sharing that. That's first of all, I'm glad to know that you are,
human.
Yes, and also that's such a difficult thing. So your vulnerability and honesty in that conversation, I love it because you're literally saying no to that thing that you're praying God, that you're spending hours praying
especially
God.
When they check all the boxes. Remember, this is a person, okay, he's like this, he does this, you are like this, or it's harder when it's exactly what you want. But that's the best kind of sacrifice to give God, because then he knows, because the response that God gave to Abraham is like, now I know that you love me. Not before when you were confessing or crying in church, or it's now when you've given up the thing that you want. Now I know that you love me. That's the proof that you love God. Not when everything is nice and rosy and all you're doing is crying and confessing to him.
Okay, I love the thread. And the thing about hearing your story, you see how the dots connect. So you see how you're making this decision now because of things that you were doing previously. Okay, you said there's something that was happening after you transitioned from school. Let's enter that now.
So
did you graduate?
I did.
Okay.
I'll come to that. But I'd like to, I think it was in the last year. I forget when exactly, but I know it was not after 2007, which was after I had graduated. But it was in the last year or third year when I was in campus. And remember, I had told you that God had begun to put it in my heart to pray for the nation.
Yes.
So God tells me, you're going to do this thing of 21 days, praying for the nation. In my head, I'm thinking, how? And of course, because of Sita Moodley, there was connections. I spoke to the pastors and they allowed me to use Hope FM with James Okumu.
Yes. And just in case you don't understand the connection between that, Sitam on Hope FM. Yes.
Yeah.
So at that time, NPC.
Yes, NPC Woodley. So I spoke to my pastors and I told them this is what God had been telling me. Now, because I had built credibility with the pastors and they had known me, they had seen God at work in me and all that, they knew by the time I was going to tell them that this is something that God had put in my heart. It wasn't just a flimsy, off the top of my head sort of like thing. So I met with James, we agreed. So the programs used to start at 6 a.m. In Hope FM. So because there was no slot, we said we'll introduce a 5 a.m. slot for those 21 days to pray for the nation. I used to live in Kibera. So I'd come from Kibera all the way to Valley Road every morning to be there on time for 5 a.m. to start the prayer session. I didn't know that there was such a huge following of guys who were actually joining us in prayer for the nation at the time. Now, remember, I'm following God out of obedience, but then it's creating a whole other following online of guys who are actually joining. So by the time we're done with the 21 days, I knew God had done something in me. I knew that I had lived out something out of obedience. And I remember James wanted to go back to 6 a.m. and he was still, no. We are we are good with 5. Yeah, we start at 5. The rest can join at 6, And that's how Hope FM shifted their programming to 5 a.m. because of that experience. But again, for me, these are the kind of things that God has used over time to show me who I am, to keep giving me snippets of, of who I am and what He's doing with me. So that had to do with the nation. So fast forward to I graduate. This is now 2007. Luckily, when I finished, I had a job offer.
You already had a job offer?
I had a job offer.
How did that, what was it and how did that come?
Well, thanks to my mentor at the time. So she had gotten me a job offer or a job opportunity with a certain company. And I had even started working with them, like sort of like part-time in my last, what is it called, semester, because I had done an accelerated program. So I only had like two classes in that last semester. So I finished. This is now 2007 and 2008. I became Miss Tourism towards the end of 2007. And at the beginning of 2008, God tells me, you're not working. Yeah. He says, you're not going to any job. You're not going to work. And he said, you're going to do ministry, which at the time was like worship in church, what I was doing. And then he says, and you're going to model. Now imagine you're going to tell your parents that. Everyone is finishing campus with the thought of tamarking or looking for a job. You have a job offer. You've already started. And God says, no. You're going to model for the next 1 year and ministry or whatever ministry was at the time. I didn't have a problem with that.
Are you okay? You're already you're okay to
remember, rise, kill, eat. It's a difference between walking with God and knowing His voice versus what will people say. This is the thing that society expects of me. I remember my sister was in the States at the time, and my dad called and said, "This girl has gone nuts." My mentor summoned me and told me, "You're crazy." Everyone was telling me, "What the hell?" In fact, the words I was being told was, "Just because now you think you're Miss Tourism, now you're not going to work. You think this is a job. It's gotten to your head." I got all manner of insults and backlash because of that position. And I just knew this is not what God wants me to do.
But that must
hurt. And at the same time,
this is people who, I don't want to trivialize that emotion. Because fine, yes, you're confident in what God has told you, but this is your mentor. They are, and it was painful
because
your family. These are guys who've been supporting you.
Now remember, 2007 is when the clashes happened. So this is now December going into January, and it's sort of like spilled over into January and February and all that. So at the time, because I was very close with the Wagatas, because we were living in the heart of Kibera, our family was sort of like dispersed, like we all had to look for places to go. Because, when people talk about post-election violence, they have a very different picture of what really happened. They have a CNN picture, many people, let me not say everyone. But I was in the heart of it, you couldn't sleep because you can hear the gunshots and there are people banging your fence and banging your, and just there's a lot of noise and chaos. They're stealing from the shop next door. You don't know whether they'll break into your house, So my dad just figured, okay, you know what? I'll stay back with your mom. The rest of you just find, we're sort of like allocated to different places. So I went to the Wagatas, and to this date, I'm grateful to God for them.
Hold on, that is crazy. I didn't even thank you for bringing that back. During the post-election violence, you were at the heart of it, of course. Kibera, there was a lot of different fighting that happened there. And Raila, it being sort of taken from him, Kibera was his, not stronghold, I don't know how to use that word, but he was loved there.
Absolutely.
So you had to literally leave where you live and go and stay with other people.
Yep, for more than a month. And it was...
And leave your parents at home. So every day there's that, hey, I hope you guys are okay.
Thankfully, because of the community environment, there was a way that things were being, you're safeguarding each other.
Yes.
But it's your neighbors, it's people who are from around who are angry at the results and therefore demonstrating and doing all sorts of things.
Wow.
But while that was going on...
And this is just after you've prayed for a country?
Yes.
So you've got a heart for this country. You know, all this is tied, eh?
Yeah.
You've got a heart for this country, and yet the country is burning.
Yeah. So at that time, remember, there's the pressure. I mean, there's a post-election violence going on. There's a pressure of you've just finished campus and now you're thinking you've just become Miss Tourism.
Yes.
Right? And then now you've been offered a job and God says you're not going to work. So there's a lot going on at the same time. And I remember this particular night when, after many interactions with my boss, I mean with my mentor then, and many people, even the pastors would call me and tell me, "Are you crazy? Like, have you lost your mind? What's going on? Are you getting that well paid? You know, using this modeling thing?" They didn't understand my position, but if God has ever been clear to me, that was one of those moments. I could hear Him so clearly. It was those seasons when I wouldn't sleep because His presence was so tangible on me, and I was having experiences with Him.
And
so I remember
you're telling them, you're telling them.
I said, God says I don't work. And they're like, what does that even mean? No one understood what I was saying. And this is now 2007. And I remember this particular night, I get a text from my mentor and she says, "See me in the morning, show up ready to work." And God tells me, go for the meeting. So, and she said, be here by 8:30, and I was there by 8:30. And I remember sitting across from her at the desk, and God was so clear, you dare not take that job. You will not work for the next 12 months. So I'm here between a rock and a hard place, but for me, the rock and the hard place was all God. This other one was irrelevant in my view at the time. There's just a lot of pressure from everyone else. But in that moment, I looked at her straight and I said, I'm so clear on what God is telling me, not to work for the next 12 months, and that He expects, or rather He wants me to model and to get involved in ministry. Now, remember, I think this person is a pastor, like part-time pastor and part-time, you know, what she was doing. So ideally, you would expect that they would understand. Ideally, you would expect that the people who would be affirming you are the ones who are nurturing you in your walk with God. And at the time, for me, the Wagatas were more of whatever God tells you to do. We have already seen you do things that we didn't understand, but we figured it was God and we saw it was God. So they were sort of like from that position. But many people, including my parents, including, you know, the people around me, just said, you're crazy. But that day I looked her straight and I told her, this is what God is telling me. And she just told me, okay. And since you've made up your mind, I guess you will learn, or you'll figure it, you will experience, you will learn, you know, usipofunzwa na, you know, utafunzwa na ulimwengu.
Yeah.
And that day when I walked from her office and I was walking out of that premise, I had God so clearly tell me, now you're walking in the right direction.
Oh.
Contrary to everything else that everyone was telling me.
Popular belief. Yes.
Contrary to what everyone else was approving, I had Him clearly say, now you're walking in the right direction. And I knew I had struck something, and I didn't want to let go of that experience with God. So it only emboldened me.
Yeah, I'm like that. There's something about your character that has definitely not been, but has been formed by Him, because you are making an extremely difficult decision by doing that. Let me paint a reality. It means you're going to lose some friends. It means you're going to lose the respect that people may have given you. It means you can lose a mentor. It means there are people who are just waiting for you to fall. And I'm not trying to put down anybody. I'm just talking about the reality that happens when you sometimes decide to follow God over the popular opinion or the thing that looks good. So what happens now after that?
Okay, first of all, on that note, I think that's what the devil uses to make people not obey God. It's normally a threat, and his threats don't come to pass, and he will only try. But it's when you wilt that what are you really safeguarding? How many, okay, let's say I even safeguarded. Do you know most of those people are no longer in my life right now? So 10, maybe 15 years later, what was I trying to safeguard at that point? And that's the thing that the enemy always tries to make us focus on, to preserve what is inevitably going to pass with time. It will inevitably rot, it will be stolen, it will pass, it will decay somehow. But that's what he makes us focus on and expend our energies on. But then if you follow God, for me that step was like a step into in the spiritual realm, into a level that I knew God forever secured for me. Because it was like, what I normally say is like, he catapulted me, he pulled me back. Because you've advanced in your career, you're almost like, going ahead of your peers, but he pulls you back. But it's that pulling back that if you've done fair, the way we used to, a catapult.
Yes.
It's the farther you're
Not
pulled
even a
back.
catapult, like fair.
A fair. The farther you're pulled back, by the time that bladder is let go,
Yes.
you will even surpass, and which is what happened to me.
Yep.
When I track my career and my walk with God,
Yes.
I know beyond a shadow of doubt that moment right there was one of the defining moments for me. When I said no to everyone else, or rather many people, and obeyed God, and seemingly lost, but it was only a threat from darkness, because first of all, I didn't lose anyone in that sense, because they admire you.
Yes.
Many of them want to do what you want to do, but they don't have the boldness to do it.
Yep.
And they just think, damn, I wish I could do it like you. And they see and they watch God at work in you. And to date, they can actually testify, many of them, that that thing that I did was actually the right thing, because I would never have predicted how my life turned out many years later. So do God.
Not again to trivialize this, but you didn't do what your parents would have had you do. It's okay sometimes if it's friends and mentors, but when it enters, all you've spoken about throughout this whole story from beginning to where we are at right now is the highest praise for your parents. You are entering this adulthood where now you're beginning to make decisions on your own, despite even what the people who brought you into this world and who you have utmost respect for. I'm not trying to say you disrespected them in doing that thing, making that decision. That's still crazy.
Let me tell you what it is, actually. Do you remember when Christ was in the temple at the age of 12? And
like,
his response.
Don't you know I would have been in my father's house?
I'm about my father's business. When you have clarity.
Please know this, a 12-year-old telling his earthly father.
Precisely. I mean, it would have been considered rude, dishonor, all that stuff. But in God's eyes, he was actually doing the right thing. And if there's one of the things that I know for sure, if you're genuinely.
Answers. I like it. I like your biblical. I'm going to throw them again.
If you're genuinely working with God, at one point or the other, you will have to disappoint the people who actually speak into your life, in terms of the people who expect certain things of you. And it's actually biblical when he says, that I didn't come to bring.
Yes, I will separate father and mother.
Precisely.
Brother from. Yes.
And when you walk with God, he does sort of like demand on you things that will make you separate. For example, Abraham, the person that we admire and call the father of faith, it all began by God saying, get out of your father's house.
Watch a terror.
Everything that you know, everything. In fact, I asked this of your father, and he didn't do it, because the scripture says that God had asked the father to do it.
For real, that's terror.
Precisely. But this guy, Abraham comes in, he now fulfills the thing that God had placed a demand on him to have done all this while. So God will place a demand on you at any one point. He will ask you to do stuff that will go against what people approve of. Whether it's your parents, your friends, sometimes even your spouse.
Yes.
And that's why I say, God forbid that you should get married to someone who doesn't understand your walk with God, or who you've not come into a place of oneness, of actually flowing and knowing that this is what God is asking of us to do. So I would say, if Christ will be able to do it at 12, it will definitely happen to the rest. In fact, in John, I think 14 or 15, he says, if they treated me, who is considered the teacher, like your role model like this, if they hated me, they will definitely hate you. So first of all, you anticipate it. If you walk with God, first of all, it's going to be lonely, and sometimes it's going to be controversial. And then to some extent, you will definitely have to disappoint a lot of people. And you have to be okay with it. Because sometimes that's how he actually opens up new doors for people to see and know, oh my God, this is actually God. So yeah.
Ah, man, I'm loving this story. Let's take a 2-minute break. We'll be back to continue the story. Welcome back to the Playhouse featuring Sellah Bogonko. Now listen, if you're catching us here, do your life a favor. You're not doing justice to the story. You probably read the title and that's why you want to watch it from here. Go back to the very beginning. It's important to understand the context of the story. This is our first series of season 5, and let me just say that it is beautifully setting the stage for the next couple of playhouses that we're going to have. This is such an amazing conversation that we're having thus far. I don't even want to spoil it. I just want us to continue going on with the story. So where we left this story, Sellah, first of all, thank you for the amazing life story and the vulnerability with which you're sharing your story. I also just want to say a big thank you to Hemingway's Karen for their hospitality. Okay, let's continue. Now, where we left off this story, you've decided to follow God, and God has told you for the next 12 months, you're going to be a model, no working, and you're going to be in ministry. Continue the story.
So yeah, like I said, I went against what everyone else was telling me and sort of like got into this space. And again, for me, because now you're left with almost like you have to prove God right. There was not a pressure to do that, but it was almost like I have to make it count. Like if he set me on this pathway that is almost like a wilderness, then it has to count for something. Otherwise, then I would have stayed and continued in the, the normal pattern of the picture that we have of life where, you finish school, you get into a nice job, you get married, etc. But God then had sort of like given me a different trajectory, and I was now following him into the unknown. Let
me ask you a question, and this is a very important question. Money.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. So you'd think that because now I've followed God into ministry, to now it is for hand to mouth. No, I got deals like crazy. Because remember he said modeling. And that's when he sort of like thrust me into the entertainment industry. That's where I met all the many artists, good friends of mine that I know to date. And so I got one gig after the other just to show, just to make appearances as Miss Tourism. And then...
okay, very important to note. You started getting revenue generation through this title of Miss Tourism.
Yes, through endorsements, advertisements, different things that he would have me do. Like I say, just appearances, to come and speak, because there would be like youth events and then you're invited to speak and they give you something small, which you're not expecting, but it's like God's way of just telling you, I got you, I didn't just set you on this pathway for you to eat to air.
That's funny. Were you living at home still in this period?
Yes, I was living at home at this time.
So you're still okay, you're still at home.
Yeah, in that sense. Yes. But you see, you're going back to a home where you're still being asked, how is your modeling taking you? In a way. Yes. But I must give it up to my parents. For some reason, because they had begun to watch this thing about me, the moment they understood, every time I'd say I sensed God would have me do something, even if they struggled with it, somehow they'd let me be. And in a way, they would then be blessed in that way, because they would just nurture that thing, either by giving me room to figure myself out, or they're not the kind of imposing parents that would insist that you do something a certain way. Yeah. So for me, they actually give me that liberty, and being God-fearing, I think there was something that was tugging in their hearts.
Okay. I get it.
The example I would give is maybe like Jacob. How there's a time when he watched the thing that was happening between Isaac, the way he watched Jacob. He didn't understand fully what had happened, but he could see what God was doing with him. The same thing that had also happened with Jacob over Joseph. When Joseph came to tell the story of I saw this, I saw this. See, because he had also had experiences with God in terms of dreams that God would give him, he knew that this boy is onto something. So, while everyone else was ridiculing him like, you're telling us to be about, you think we're going to worship you. But Jacob actually understood that there's something that God is doing with this boy. So I think that's the position that my parents took.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. So how is this season? I don't want to trivialize this 12-month back pulling of the fair.
Yeah. So remember, I've just become Miss Tourism. Again, the thing about the project that you're supposed to do. So when you become a beauty queen, it's expected that you will do a project in line with the reason for which you became, what is it called, the queen in that area. So again, because of practice, I went back to God and I said, okay, Lord, show me what I'm supposed to do. Now, you'd think he'd tell me to go and do something in terms of tourism. But in actual sense, he began to, remember I was still living at home
Yes.
in Kibera.
Yes.
So he began to, and this is after post-election violence, and everyone is everywhere, sort of like confused, and of course, most importantly, the young people. So he put this thing in my heart to begin meeting with my peers, or people who are younger than me, guys just from the mtaa, you know? And he put this thing in my heart to be meeting with them weekly. And because, like I told you, I was always the high performance, sort of like pushing myself, setting targets, setting goals, which was also part of what God was using to train me to push myself. And he began to tell me to walk with them. And by the way, most of them are Muslims. So I can't go there with just God, Christianity, etc. But somehow God showed me how to interact with them. So I'd meet with this group of like about 70, 80 young people.
70, 80.
Kibera at the stage, if anyone knows Karanja Road, at the stage, but there's a place we used to meet. And we'd meet and we'd break into groups, and I'd tell them, set targets for yourself. Like in the next 1 month, where do you want to be? Like just to push their mentality outside of, this is how we are, this is what life has dealt us with, this is what we can become.
Whoa.
And I remember my
How did you
joy,
even mobilize? Like, don't rush over this story. This is so huge.
Okay, first of all,
especially in line with where you're at or what you've been doing.
See, they had watched me become Miss Tourism.
Oh, so
they knew me. You see, I wasn't a stranger in Kibera. They knew me. We were the Bogonko girls. So, first of all, you become Miss Tourism. They are watching your life. You're living in a community, even if you're not at it very close with them, but you begin to have an influence that you don't even realize that you do have.
You're a light within the community.
And there's some that God had already drawn to me, and we just talk, not necessarily like hang out, but just talk. And somehow these ones would now mobilize for themselves, something that I found useful in politics much later in life.
We're getting
You always need the mobilizers, you know? So these guys would always bring the people. And somehow the likes of Zuhura, Yusuf, all those guys that we'd meet with, they would now become, you'd spot the leaders, and those leaders begin to come sort of like the ones that are influenced, because they're not there throughout, so they're able to influence their peers. And it was a mix of Muslims and Christians, but it was an amazing experience for me. This was contrary to, again, going the tourism way into going the opposite direction of form this thing. So God had me registered this CBO, which is a community-based organization called Hoki. It was even featured in Nation. And we do like different things like cleanups and activities that were all geared towards how do you shift your mind from what you are right now to what you're supposed to be. But my main goal was helping them set targets. And I remember there's a time when I told them that by August, this was I think earlier in the year, and I told them by August I'll be driving. I'll have my own car. And this is like, I think a year later, or at some point, I can't remember the exact timing. And because I did that program for a bit. And for sure, they saw me driving. And you know, sometimes there's nothing that speaks better for some people than results.
Yes.
So for them, they're like, oh my God, this thing actually works. You know, whatever you're telling us. And you see, that gives me a basis to then introduce God and introduce my God and introduce who I am and why I do what I do. Again, a training that I would never have gotten in any other kind of experience, in any other kind of environment, so to speak. Yeah.
So first and foremost, man, I'm mind blown about God's ability to see the past, present, and future. Because this tourism thing that he tells you, there's a bigger purpose as to which I will use it for, becomes your magnets when it comes down to the hood and mobilizing and doing impacting youth. But that same time, while you're doing that, it becomes a foundation and training ground for when you're entering politics and you now need to do
much later in life.
Yes, much later in life. So it's nothing is wasted in the journey and in the process.
Absolutely.
So what about ministry-wise and in church?
I was very active still, leading worship and doing my thing and all that. And
did it become difficult because you are not working?
No.
Or it didn't? Nothing changed? Nothing
changed for me. In fact, like I said, there's a way that God always shows up to give you a witness or to give you an affirmation that you're actually walking in the right direction, because I had more time to spend with him. And those are the days now, that thing about spending time in the basement, or in church at some point, doing different things, and just really spending time with God intensifies your walk with him. By the time I was leading worship, I knew that the levels I was hitting in God that were a function of the freedom or the time that I had been given, that I was now spending in investing in him, as opposed to maybe having a day job that I would have to go to. the minute he said ministry, I understood exactly what he was saying. It wasn't just ministry in terms of standing on stage and leading worship. It was ministry in terms of who I am and my life speaking. So that intensified, and I felt like God used that year to just make sure I was really grounded.
It was 2008.
Yes, for what was to come then.
Okay. At this time, do you even have any interest in politics? Did you see your life even going in that direction? No,
absolutely not. And I forgot to say something that is important, because God then introduced someone in my life at that point. Remember when I said that everyone was saying no, and everyone was saying, how can you forgo a job? And God introduced someone that I to date call my father, who began to, he's sort of like the first person, or the only person at the time who told me, if this is God, it's a no-brainer for him, because that's how he lives and that's how he's always lived his life. Like if God demands of you to do CTA for free, for example, you do it. Like for him, it's not like, what are you arguing with people about?
Yep.
Yeah, you follow God into the unknown, and he always shows up. And that is one of the things that sort of like strengthened me, because it opened my eyes to see there's actually people who live like this. They may be few, but they're there. Yeah.
Okay, so how does the story progress?
So at this time so then at the end of that year, which was around end of 2008 into 2009, God then brings me a job. Like literally found me. I didn't have to go looking for it. And this person calls me and tells me, I have a position for you that I want you to take up. And of course I go back to God, and he tells me that's fine. And I got into this sector, which was construction. And this is a funny thing. You get into a company, and it was like, of course it was like, what do you call it? It was a construction company, and so there are not many structures at the time, and you get in and you have the wisdom of how to lay structures in place and how to put things together.
This were our neighbors or navigators?
Yes.
Next to navigators.
Yes,
I remember.
yes. So anyway, so I get into this, and God uses it to shift me from just being I would have
that
entered.
Was your first job.
That was my first job. So I entered.
Hold on, you're making it sound like you started huko.
That's what I'm about to explain. So as opposed to entering as an admin, you know the way you start like a reception job, or kienda sana, assistant manager, or something like that. God literally shifted me all the way to the operations manager, which basically means you're the second in command.
I remember.
And it was because I got in, and all I wanted to do for them was like set up processes and put structures in place, because they were doing well. But then
Sellah,
again,
that was your first job. Are you saying to me, I'm a bit in shock?
Because you know it, yeah.
Like that?
It was just favor, and that's what I'm saying, the catapults. God takes you back, and you seem like you're losing time and losing opportunity, but by the time he releases you, I got into this place, and I knew I was earning a lot more than my peers. I knew the position, of course, was prestigious. Then for God to top it up, we begin to earn awards for being the best in this, the best in this, because we had put systems in place.
And that was
we're
your
doing
role.
well, precisely. And you're trusted with basically run the company. And you're like, where do I start from? And God begins to teach you and train you. But again, that was like now the beginning of the foundation of my career, in now involving God in who you are as a career person.
Okay, I'm going back to this because I'm actually shocked about this.
Why?
We were neighbors at Navigator, so once in a while we'd have lunch or just stop and talk.
Yeah.
But that was your first job. I'm trying to emphasize just the level at which I then saw you at. And it's not even I saw you at, that you were at within that company. You're right.
Yeah.
You were literally the number two. In fact, a lot of the times I'd come into the office and it's yours. You are heading it.
That's when God emphasized for me the thing about faithfulness. You know, when you get, like for example, someone working with you, or you get into a position and get an opportunity, the minute you're faithful with what is little, it's scriptural. You're faithful with what is little, God will definitely give you much. If you're faithful with what is another man's, he will entrust you with what is your own. So I literally owned it in a way that this thing has to work or work. And so I gave it my all. I invested my time, my everything in making sure that it would become what I knew it can become. And for us to get those awards and be recognized, nationally and then Africa-wide, it was an amazing testimony for me of what God can do when you actually yield your life to him.
And my question is, even the skills that you had, like throughout this whole journey, I've not per se had you talk about the skills of companies, organizational structure and things like that?
I had a stint, I forgot to say, I had a stint in terms of internship in early 2007, where I met, she's now currently I think in charge of quality at Kengen, an amazing woman who used to tell me, account for your time, 24 hours in a day, tell me what you were doing at 8, at 9. And for almost like 3 months, she was teaching me how to set up structures, but at the same time, she was teaching me how to set up structures in my own life. So that's Catherine Nyambala. So, so that's the only stint that I had in terms of working before now getting into this job later.
So literally you are applying what you learned in your internship?
Not necessarily. I would say,
or you could see errors, you could see...
Yeah, honestly, I was discovering as I go along. And that's a bit about working with God, because you would realize you can do things that you didn't know you can do. Because you're not... My life was not compartmentalized. It was, okay, even this job, the way it came, it was a huge, door opened by God, which I would never, even if I applied for it, I wouldn't have gotten it, you understand? But for God to open it, and then you go in and you have favor, and then you begin to work, and you're the one determining the direction of the company, working in tandem with the, with the owner and with the CEO. It was a beautiful experience for me, especially on matters of faithfulness and also just applying yourself. Remember, by the way God had trained me, I would push my own limits as a person, and therefore, to date, every job that I've had, one of my roles has always been to raise the bar. Like, how can we do better? How can we perform better? How can we get to the next level that we're supposed to get into?
What about as you're being thrown new challenges that you've never faced before within the company? How do you overcome those hurdles?
Like I said, most of them were, I would say, I guess because the CEO was still largely involved in the company, it was more of, they have the vision. And this is one of the things that I learned, that every visionary requires someone who's actually, who believes in the vision enough to implement it like it's theirs. I learned that because some of them are limited in the sense of, and I realized this is a pattern that God gave me in all my work environments. You're brought to the person who has the vision, or who is like the overall person, but sometimes they lack the graces to implement, or they don't have the time. Or they don't have the, just the ability to be everywhere at the same time. But they need that person who takes that vision, incubates it enough as though it's theirs. To the extent of pushing it forward to other people and making sure that it's actually implemented on the ground. So that's, for me, being a number 2 to the CEO then, that was my role. In fact, I was just excited by the fact that this is where we are going, this is where you want to go, okay, I will make it happen.
I need to emphasize what you've just said. You've just given people tips and tricks, I'm not going on tricks in quotes, of how to get job security, but even promotion. And there's nothing that a visionary loves more than somebody who catches the vision and actually runs with it and implements it as they would, or better than they would.
One of the things that I found out, and this again I learned during the internship, but also as I sort of grew in my career and just generally in life, there are always opportunities for growth. It's just that many of us are too lazy, too complacent, too, like in our own world, or sometimes too afraid to take them on. Most of the times, the reason why I've advanced in my career is because I took the risk when I saw the opportunity. When you do a lot more than what is confined to you, remember when I say that I take responsibility, even what is not necessarily mine. That trait has always landed me in, you increase your value, you become more valuable to the organization, more valuable to the individual, to the extent that the minute something comes up, you're top of mind. You're not an afterthought. You're actually the person for, okay, there's this opportunity, who do we entrust it to? And they know for sure that you can do it and you will do it well. And then it helps you expand your skills. It helps you increase your ability to do more. But many of us don't take that opportunity, especially, sorry to say, in this generation, many of us are very complacent or just comfortable with what we've been given. And therefore you limit your own growth because you're the one who's put a leash on yourself. So when you remove the leash and say, okay, there's this thing that needs to be done, even something as basic as, okay, clean the office, or, has the person who's supposed to be clean the office, has this person who's supposed to be doing this done this, you get to learn and to increase your skills and therefore expand your own value or increase your own value and expand your own capacity to handle more. Because the more you can handle, the more valuable you are. And for some reason, in corporate, the more the money will follow you.
It's so true. Yeah. I have a question. First of all, how long were you in this organization?
So that was 3 years. Again, the transition.
3 years?
Yeah.
3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was the first job. And then at the end of 3 years, I was poached because of what I was doing.
I have a question. First of all, how long were you in this organization?
So that was 3 years. Again, the transition.
3 years?
Yeah.
3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was the first job. And then at the end of 3 years, I was poached because of what I was doing.
So, even before getting poached, I remember meeting you in this season, chilling a bit with you at this season.
Yeah.
There's something that you told me that was confusing, which was, even before being poached, you already began to get the inclination that God was going to ask you to move somewhere else.
Yeah. It's always been my story. You know, like when you know seasons are over, you've done what you're supposed to do. And I remember he actually used scripture for me, you know, from moving from this place to the other. And at that point when he's speaking, there's no door open. There's nothing there's no fununu or aka incline that you're going to leave. But then a few moments, just like the way he always deals with me, a few moments or a few weeks or months later, I can't remember, I meet this person who then comes and tells me, there's actually an opportunity for you. And interestingly, it was the same mentor who I had walked away from, who came looking for me and said, I'm in this place now, and I think you'd be great for this position. Why don't you come and have a conversation with the CEO? And that's how I went back to God, and then he told me, yeah, because you see, he had already begun dealing with me. By the time I had the conversation and I knew what it was, they were poaching me because of what I had been doing, and they had heard of it, and therefore they wanted me now to implement it in their company.
You're not going to say the company as well?
No.
My God, you know, you're talking about some, I know the companies, I just want to say it. But these are not tiny companies.
No.
These are companies that are doing millions of dollars in terms of
that's legit, yeah.
Yes, like revenue. This is not small time companies that you move to. The second one that I'm talking about. I think I want to ask, did you go back to school before going to this company?
Yes, actually.
The second company?
Yes.
Okay, question is why? Why did you go back to school?
Okay, so this is now, like during the third year.
We'll call one company company A. Because can go and do your own research. LinkedIn is your friend. Company B.
So interestingly, remember I said that for me, I had always seen myself as a corporate girl. In fact, the times that God would speak to me about my career, he sometimes uses vision. So the vision I would see of myself is in a boardroom, making presentations, pitching to investors. That's how I would see myself. But then at this point, so I'm obviously thinking I'm going to do an MBA to advance my what is it called, my corporate career. And I begin looking at Stellenbosch, you know, Strathmore and different places, University of Cape Town, blah, 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 University of Nairobi. I was just considering which one would be convenient for me as I'm building my career. And I remember I applied to 2 of them. And then something started happening in my heart when God would say, you're not doing it. There's no MBA you're doing. I'm like, what? So I then spent time when I was like, what is this thing that I'm hearing that I'm not supposed to do an MBA? So when I spent time with God and I prayed about it and I sat with him, it then became clear when I began hearing that you're going to do governance. In my head, I'm thinking, what? Because I hated politics with a passion.
What?
I was like, what the hell? I mean, it was like left field. How do you switch me from corporate to governance? And this was the time when I was transitioning from one company to the other, the first company
A to company B.
And I said, God, okay, first of all, who even in this country offers governance? Like, what are we going to do with governance? And I even thought it was corporate governance. Then I thought, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not interested. I'm more of a, strategy, blah, 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 business strategy, implementation, execution kind of girl. But here he is saying, public governance, not even just governance. So that was in 2010 at this time. So I'm like, I don't know about this, Lord. Now, for him, the way, again, different experiences with different people. The day I was clear in my spirit that I know I'm hearing God, the following day I meet a friend of mine, and she tells me, oh my God, Sellah, I wanted to call you yesterday. So I say, okay. Then she says, I got into this school, and there's this class that I joined, and it's a master's in public governance, and public governance and leadership, and I think it would be great for you. You know, I just stood and I was like, what are you telling me? Like, God, I've had you. It was so surreal for me, the way he sent someone to make sure, you know, like the way Moses dealt with God, and he's like, okay, how do I know you're the one sending me? Who do I tell them? And he had all these stories. I'm a stammerer. In my head, I was thinking, I'm not even, like, what am I bringing to the table in terms of governance?
I'm not even passionate about it.
Precisely. But anyway, so he sends the girl, and I just say, okay, I'm just going to check it out. And I knew for sure he wanted me to. Now, the moment I know something from God, I don't argue with him. And even if I struggle with it for a bit, I still end up doing it. And I still do it.
Yes,
you know, you do it as you're struggling, but you know this is your will.
Obedience is not the way the Bible says. There's a story of, I asked somebody to do something in the morning, and they said they're going to do it, but didn't do it. And there's the one who said they won't do it,
and they did it.
And they did it. Yeah. So
I remember, now this is the part where I joined the class. It was an evening class, of course, because now I had transitioned to the new company. It was an evening class. And I remember the first class I went into was called Public Legal and Regulatory Framework. Now, what the hell? I was like, what? And the lecturer was, I mean, a nice lecturer and all, but then I was like, what am I doing in this class? This is so off in me. Like, it has nothing to do with the picture I see of myself. Again, the picture I see of myself. And I remember at tea break, because it was the first part of the class, then you do like a small tea break, then you go back to the last part up until 8:30. And during the tea break, we're outside standing, and I'm literally tearing. Because in my mind, I cannot fathom that I'm going to do this for, I think it was 2 years or something. And I was like, I cannot, this cannot be my life. God, please prove to me that this is you. And I was really struggling. And as I was somewhere in the corner somewhere, people are having tea and all that, this lady walks up to me and tells me, she's of course a bit older than me, because most people, I mean, at that age, you're like 20, 23, 24. What are you doing in a governance class? You know, you don't even know yourself. You know, you're still discovering yourself. So this lady walks up to me. She's called Ogla Karani, an amazing woman who just decided, you will go through this class and you will finish it. She just had my story and she said, you will have to finish it. So anyway, she asks me, she asked me what's wrong, and I said, I just don't know if this is for me. Then she said, you had so many options. I mean, she was so hard on me. Like, so she had so many options. So why didn't you take, you have MBA, you have what? And I said, yeah, right? Then I said, but God told me to do it. She said, if it is God, you better do it and finish it. And in that moment, I almost like, snap out of it. You know, like, you can't say something is God and you're still struggling with it. And I remember that second half of the class, I went in and I just purposed to listen
You change your mindset.
Completely. And sometimes we block ourselves from connecting to what is God because it's not our preference. It's not our desire. It's not aligned to what you want. And you miss out completely on God. Meanwhile, He was prepping me for what was to come.
You know what's mind-blowing me about this whole thing? First of all, again, I remember this era because I was with you. Remember when I once dropped you there and my moti died? He died. Oh God, night calling the mechanic. Opio, niaje, inge like.
You'll edit that part.
Anyway, but what you just said,
I even forgot that.
It's so mind-blowing because from the exterior, and I have to say this just so that people can, you look like you just had it all together, that you knew what you were doing, that you are, you've really got this thing in lock, and all the boxes ticked. What's jazzing me about this story, jazzing, showing my age, but what I love about it is you had the ability to hear God. You know, you've been telling me about hearing God, but even when it's something that has nothing to do with you. You know what I mean?
I struggled because I didn't want, I think because I had created a picture of myself, I was struggling to fit this thing into that picture. and therefore struggling with the will of God. So he was pushing me in the direction that was his direction, his will.
Yes.
But I was familiaring on this thing that he had told me, or this thing that I thought he had told me. And again, back to liberty, just the flexibility of today he tells you eat, rise, kill and eat, and then tomorrow he tells you you're not supposed to eat.
Yes.
And it's different instructions for different people, as we said. But then it's that the moment you connect with what is God, you have to be able to let go of everything else, because it's not God's will for you. Especially when he's already made it clear, I want you to go this direction.
Again, because you've talked about that, I remember your transition when you're being poached again.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize that you were so valuable in company A that the poach wasn't easy.
No, it is a struggle.
Like
again, back to value. The value that you bring to the table will always make you, they would want to offer you whatever it takes for you to stay. But again, the offer should not be the reason for you to stay or not stay. It's always, what is God telling me? And the moment God says it's time, for me it was not the money that I was going to get on this side. In fact, to some extent, I didn't get the package that I wanted on this other end. But because God had told me it's time to move and he had made it clear it's to this organization, then regardless the struggle that I was having with, okay, this is not the target that I had set for myself or the thing that I was envisioning for myself, I had to embrace it, because the moment you embrace the mind of God and the will of God for yourself, the other things that you think are important somehow find themselves sort of like just coming together. And you have to be able to trust God that that will always happen.
This is heavy. That's a lot. Okay, let's talk about company B.
So I go in.
This is heavy. That's a lot. Okay, let's talk about company B.
So I go in. Again,
is it similar roles or
so
or
this
what are you
time
doing
I
now?
was going, because this is a much larger organization. It had, operations in multiple countries. So I was coming in to make sure that the targets that had been set from a strategy perspective, from a revenue target perspective, making sure that all the countries were working in harmony towards the overall targets for the company.
All the countries.
Yes.
So now you've moved from the region. I mean, from the country to the region.
Yes.
And how many countries are we talking about?
At the time, I think around like 7 or 8 large companies. And then this is the other thing that I wanted to say. Like, because of how God had catapulted me, like I said at the beginning, I was sitting in boardrooms that my age that did not allow me.
Yeah, of course.
Simply because I walked in obedience to God. So when the CEO would not be able to attend a meeting, I would be the one to attend in company A. Now in company B, you're sitting at senior management, overseeing country managers. They have to report to you because you're reporting to the CEO on the performance. And I learned very early on how to work with older people who are more experienced than me, and holding them accountable to the point of saying, you were supposed to have done this last week, have you done it? Like being what we call a PMO executive, where you're asking questions that make sure that everyone is actually working in tandem or towards the target that they set. Because many times people set targets, but then they just sit there. But you need that person to keep the momentum going. Again, something that God had begun at a personal level. Remember the high achiever, pushing myself sort of thing? He was using that to naturally encourage other people. And then of course you have to learn diplomacy, working with people who, like I said, are much older than you, more experienced than you.
I have to ask this one, because first and foremost, we're not talking about the era where corporate Kenya had as many women as it has right now. Neither did it have the age group.
Okay, first of all, I'm not that old, but yeah.
No, then.
I hear you.
Know what I mean?
I hear you.
Corporate Kenya, at that time, there were not that many women in senior position as compared to right now.
That's true.
In fact, I think there's boy child really needs to wake up.
Yeah,
there's something not happening in that sector. But what I mean by that, at that time, because what year are we talking about? 2010. 2010. That's 12 years ago. 12 years ago, you're in senior management. How old are you at that time? You're roughly 20 something. Okay.
I'm having to do the math.
Okay. You're below 25.
I was 25.
You're 25.
Yeah.
You're 25, you're talking about different country managers reporting to you. These country managers are probably 90% male.
Yep.
And twice your age in situations, in some situations. I want to talk about the working environment, because now the values and all these conversations with God that you've been having and been incubated in corporate Kenya, now you're at the full testing of it.
Yep.
What does that mean? And this is corporate, like their targets to reach this, financials to whatever. There are people.
And you have SLAs with clients. So, and for us, it was like an uptime, because it was a lot of the heavier work was more on how is the organization performing in relation to maintaining, for example, network availability and things like that. So you're reporting to another organization. And
you're let me just say it just so that people can understand. You're operating to the number one organization in the region. So when I mean that, I'm talking about Safaricom. They were your clients. Oh no, you were their clients.
No, they were our clients.
Yes, yes. They were the way you said
one of the clients, because then you're operating regionally, you know, so you have other big telcos that have different SLAs that you have to understand and make sure that those countries are hitting their targets, and all that stuff.
Okay, just explain to me the environment. Was it different because you're a woman, or and everything that you had learned now entering full testing? What did that mean?
Was it different because I was a woman? I think it was different because I was a woman and I was younger.
Okay.
I was young. But I had to find a way in wisdom, because that's where wisdom comes in. You have to find a way to help, to almost like make the other person believe that you're helping them to look good. So you see, most of this, like let's say country managers or senior managers have their own targets. So you asking them, first of all, is putting pressure on them.
Yes.
And then you reporting to the CEO is already a threat, because they have to respond to you, but they don't want to. So you have to find the wisdom to be able to engage them, to actually make them believe and know that ultimately them working with you is helping them look good and actually achieve their targets, which is what they want at the end of the day. So you have to apply a lot of wisdom, and that's something that I had to learn. Of course, the chauvinism thing happened, you know, being treated like, first of all, why are you seated at this table? You need to earn your stripes first before you get here. Things like that. But luckily, like I said, because I had at the time, I had people who wanted my value. You understand? So me doing my job was important for them as well.
Yes.
So they had and that's the thing, that they had to affirm my role for me to be able to do my work. But at the same time, they can only affirm your role so far, because ultimately you can end up creating enemies. So you have to be the one to find a way in wisdom to engage with the other team in a way that it helps you to actually advance your objectives.
Okay, from how does God speak to you in a situation like that? So how does God become relevant in the corporate culture? This is day-to-day pressure. Now it's you're there early, you're leaving late. High pressure.
For me, there's no difference between the way he speaks to me on the pulpit when I'm leading worship and he says pray for so and so, or call out, or make this altar call, and when he says to me so and so is going through something, go and speak to them. Sometimes it's that, you know, when you're so precise, almost like you're in ministry in that corporate, like the times when I've had breakthrough throughout my career, the times when I've had breakthroughs has been when you've touched on a point that is so personal to someone and you've become relevant to them because of that thing that helped you. It's like they see you in a different light. They see you as more than just a colleague or a manager. They see you as a source of life to them, in a way that they then introduce a certain level of respect because of the way you're engaging. So I don't compartmentalize my life in terms of saying, I'm in ministry on Sunday, I go and lead worship, and then on Monday I come and I'm wearing a suit and I deal. You learn, you grow. Like for example, I had to learn how to be firm, but at the same time get work done, but also be gentle enough to be able to draw people to understand that people, this is something I had to learn on the job, to understand that people are actually holistic. They go through stuff. Sometimes when someone is not performing, like now for me, I'd be a hard hitter on targets. But the moment I understood that while you're driving targets, this person just broke up with their boyfriend, or they lost a child, or they're sick, or they lost their mother. And that sensitivity for me was introduced by the Spirit of God, cautioning me, like, before you call that person and raise your voice about them being late, there's actually something else that's going on with them. And then you become a minister to them as opposed to just a manager who's asking them about their targets.
What did you like about that environment? Is this now where you had arrived, the epitome of of corporate Kenya, of not corporate Kenya, of the corporate world that you were aspiring to get to? You've gotten there now, or at that time?
Not necessarily. In fact, I think a year into the job, I do this thing every so often, and I took time out to just go and seek God. Like, are we still okay? And I began to feel like this is not the right environment for me.
A year after?
A year after, because of things that were, I mean, like, you know, normal corporates, politics, etc. And I was just like, I don't know if this is something I want to continue with. But at the time when I took time out, and there's a reason why I'm saying this, I took time out to go and pray. I was so clear that I needed to quit, and that's all I wanted to do. I was going to tell God, I'm quitting. So what are we doing next? So
What was it that had got you to that point?
Just different things, politics, and then of course because just different things. Let me just say corporate politics and all that, and also just the question of, is this advancing me in the direction that I think my life is supposed to be going to or not, right? So I remember I finished my retreat in Naivasha. On my way back, I'm coming and I meet the person that I said, my spiritual dad, and I said, this is what God has told me, I'm going to quit. And he said, you're not going anywhere. That's not what God has told you. You want to quit, so you're asking for God to validate the thing that you want. Again, back to the thing that you want vis-a-vis what God is saying, just learning through the process and learning how to work with God. But I remember I was determined to do whatever God wants. So that time I just quietened my spirit and I said, if it's His will for me to exit, it's gonna happen. So I get to the office on Monday. I came back on Sunday. I get to the office on Monday and I get in and I hear God clearly telling me, you've been moved from your department. And then the second thing I had was, there's a letter on your desk. And I go in for sure. The first person I meet is, Sellah, were you told, you know, that you've been moved from your department? And I say, what? I open, I get to my desk and I see a letter on my desk, or rather the HR person walks in after me and gives me a letter, and the brief or the summary of it was that I had been moved from my department, etc. The reason I'm bringing this up is that, like I said, there's no separation between what is God and what is not God. Just the way I hear Him about other things, I would hear Him clearly.
God on Sundays, God on Monday.
Precisely. So long story short, for me, my corporate career, especially in that environment, it became, even the opportunities that would come up. For example, there's an opportunity for you to get a promotion. I remember there's this particular one that opened, and I was being encouraged because it was the obvious next step for me. And I went to God and He said, you're not taking any promotion right now. It was a struggle for me. I'm just sharing all this to say that it's not always that I go to God and He says yes. Sometimes it's a demand on me not to do the thing that I want to do.
The same way He told you to wait 12 months.
Yeah.
Even in corporate culture, He's telling you don't take a promotion.
Precisely.
Which is
and all this was what we call in scripture about your heart being circumcised, because your heart enlarges because of desire and the things that you want. But then with time, He's the one who begins to tell you, over here you'll get, explain to me how David got to a point where he desired something that was not God. And this is a man that was after God's heart, and he was, considered a psalmist, and he was considered completely in pursuit of God's will. But with time, because of interactions with just life in general, your heart can begin to have desires that are not exactly aligned to the mind of God. And so the onus is on us to constantly go to God and say, check my spirit, check my motives, check the reason why I want this thing. If it's not your will, let me know in advance before I've gotten myself into it, and then I'm starting to cry for you to come and save me. And so that constant culture for me, or that pattern or practice for me, helped me a lot to avoid things that would otherwise be detrimental to my
So
life.
You go into this new department. What does this department now involve?
Well, it was reversed because it was not the mind of God. Because, and I don't want to sort of dwell on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whew. So what? Okay. So where does this story transition then into?
So basically, I finished my master's, and remember, I'm going to class.
2 years.
Yeah. I go to class. I'm learning governance. I come back to corporate, and I'm doing corporate-y things. It was the longest 2 years in my life. Because it was such a tug of war. And now, by this time, God had begun to impress in my spirit that, you're going into government at some point. In my head, I'm thinking, when you hear government, you're thinking civil servants, you're thinking coats on the chair, you're thinking, surely God, you could not have raised me for this, Now, by this time, God had begun to impress in my spirit that, you're going into government at some point. In my head, I'm thinking, when you hear government, you're thinking civil servants, you're thinking coats on the chair, you're thinking, surely God, you could not have raised me for this, But I had really misjudged what God wanted to do with me at the time. So I finished my master's, I graduate, and this was around 2012, 2013. And that's when now he begins to pump in my spirit about the nation. And that thing that was a spark begins to intensify in my spirit. That's when now in 2014 we did the McDowell concert.
Yes,
because
William McDowell.
He began to now emphasize certain things in my spirit and in my heart that were now manifesting regarding the nation and all that.
By the time you're making a concert like that free, there's some miraculous things that have happened.
Yeah.
To bring... By the way, we're talking about at the time you're the biggest
gospel artist.
Yes, in the world. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
That's cost to bring him. You brought his whole band, venues, all these things.
Yeah.
I know there was the plan to be a cover charge, and then suddenly I had there was an announcement that it was free.
So what happened was we had planned. I knew God wanted us to bring him. Me in particular, and we had gone through the process, agreed, made a down payment. God provided for that, and because you're already thinking, the pattern is you do a concert, you charge to recover your costs because you have to pay for KICC,
yes.
You have to pay for his ground transport, for his flights, you have to pay his costs because you also have to pay him, and the obvious thing was to charge tickets so that you're able to recover your costs. And one of these mornings, as we were planning and prepping, very close to him arriving, God asks me, who told you to charge? Now this is, I'm like, why did you let me go through the planning process to get to this point only to ask me? It's almost like, what are you doing here? Yeah. And the question in my spirit was, this is worship. This is a platform that you're creating for people to worship. I showed you this in high school. I'm the one who said you're doing it. You didn't even come back to me and say, how are we doing it? You understand? Again, the training and the practice of hearing and knowing the mind of God, not just the initial thing he tells you, go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. It's the thing about, okay, Pharaoh has refused, what are we doing? Then he says, don't worry, I got you. There are 10 series of things that are going to happen. But in that whole process, you will get to know me better. But he doesn't tell you that at the beginning. He actually tells you because he wants you to know. I think it's in 1 Peter 2:3 or 2:3. It says about that peace and grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God. Like there's an incremental multiplication that happens. The peace comes and the grace comes as you get to know him. You get confident in the boat when there's a storm because you've gotten to the point of knowing the one who multiplied the bread and the fish, he can handle this as well. So there has to be that incremental knowledge of God. And that was, again, another opportunity for me to get to know him. So he says, cancel the tickets because at least I have a witness here. There was a charge and then suddenly we say it's free and the place was packed to capacity. There was an overflow outside and it was an amazing experience. Beyond what happened there for everyone else, it was my knowledge of him. You know the way Moses can be leading people? They are seeing the signs and the wonders, but Moses is having a totally different experience with God.
Yes, exactly.
That was me. As getting to know God on levels that first of all, it's not your industry. You have no business doing a concert, but because he said you did, you turned the opposite or a different direction, he corrects you, you still end up in his will. Those are the kind of things that anchor me in terms of my walk with God, because you get to know him, not even from scripture, but from having encounters with him where he says you do. And I mean, we finished that concert, no debt, not owing anyone, McDowell. Everyone was sorted and everything sort of like worked out together the way as if we had raised enough money to pay plus profit.
That's insane. Yeah. I love what you've said. So what you're talking about is a miracle. That is the definition of a miracle happening. And one of the things that a miracle does is it makes you understand how much God, it shows you God's might and his power and his ability to provide miraculously. But it also makes you feel his love, direct love for you. You're seeing all those people and you're like, he used me to do this. Yeah. Like what on earth is that? Yeah. Okay, so you're finishing this governance school, you've graduated, tug of war happening between corporate and governance.
Yeah.
Are you beginning to read the newspaper and watch news? I think.
Well, largely because of what was going on at the time. So this is now 2014, getting into 2015. There was all this debacle about like different personalities in government and all.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that God began to do for me was point me to what was happening at the time using the programs that were being rolled out, because this is a new government that had just come in. So we've gone into devolution. There are different counties,
Yes.
and there's an interesting. You have like different personalities showing up in the governance space. And because my parents were still living in Kibera at the time, they would give me updates of, have you seen, in fact, nowadays there's no what we'd call crime, there's street lights, there's what, and of course you'd go visit, but then when you start hearing the rapid transformation that was happening in the place, you're like, I have to go see for myself. So when I went this particular time, when now we were going round to different places, because it's beyond where they were staying at the time, when we went to different places, you realize it's actually possible, because now this is what God was trying to use to speak to me. It's actually possible to be in government and to transform people's lives.
Oh man, yes.
That it's not about that coat, that jacket you were seeing on the chair, that there's actually possibility of government being able to be used to transform the lives of ordinary Kenyans and ordinary people.
In fact, the bottleneck is there.
Precisely. So I get into this space where I begin following different people just to watch, of course we've gotten a new president, Uhuru at the time. It was a different experience compared to the previous president. You have the duo, the way they were working together. And then my mind was drawn, or God began to draw my heart to Governor Waiguru at the time. No, she was a minister at the time. She was in charge of the different projects that were being rolled out. And I just started watching, for some reason, I found myself...
Before this, you had nothing?
No. So I'll tell you at what point, just so you know how God sort of like makes things work together.
So your heart starts feeling like, hey, this...
So he's drawing me to government. He's drawing my attention to government. Not like I'm interested in it, but somehow there's this thing like you need to pay more attention on this space and all that.
It's a curiosity.
Curiosity. No, like the spirit tagging, like they tells you.
Beyond curiosity.
Beyond curiosity. So I start watching her interviews and all that, and I'm looking and I'm like, okay, that's a good answer. Now I'm dealing with her as a minister, talking about the projects and talking about different things, and my heart is drawn to her, and I don't know why.
Whoa.
So I was watching most of the president's speeches as well, and just following through and saying, what exactly are we doing in terms of development as a country? So long story short, I won't get into it, but then a mutual friend introduces me to her in a certain way. So a mutual friend introduces me to her, and basically they had a mutual friend introduces me to the son, who I then begin to like help and work on a project with. And then at some point, the son introduces me to the mom. And I realized, okay, this is then the minister of devolution, Waiguru. And the way he introduced me is, you guys are so similar in terms of the way you push and the way you do all this stuff. And so I thought to myself, I had begun to admire her because she was young and she was vibrant in the governance space and all that stuff. And I didn't know why. Because remember, I'm not interested in governance, despite of having gone through a whole master's program.
And you're still in corporate?
I was still in corporate. I was still deep in corporate.
Company B.
In fact, I forgot to say that once I finished my master's, immediately the school introduced a PhD program in governance, and God says you're doing it. So I enrolled in my PhD again in governance, and basically I was stuck in this world of governance because I knew somehow God would use it later. So fast forward to this time, this is around 2014, 2015, I get to meet her, and that was the only interaction that I had had with her at the time. And of course, she begins to go through this whole process and journey of the pressure that was mounting on her at the time. And because I've just been introduced to her, and we probably speak on phone. I mean, she's a whole minister, so you don't have direct connections in that sense. This day, I was on a flight coming back from one of the countries where I was overseeing something, and God tells me, text her and tell her you're going to pray with her on Saturday. So in my head, I'm thinking, me. You know who we are talking about, because at that time you're thinking, But because it was God, I texted her and she said, oh, absolutely. And I went to her that Saturday, and in fact, what I told her, again, based on what I had heard from the Spirit, was ask her to call a few of her girlfriends who pray and pray with her, because she was going through the drama that we all know was the drama at the time. And so I went, and this was like now maybe my third or fourth interaction with her. And I went that following Saturday, met with her girlfriends for the first time, and we began to pray. And for every Saturday, for almost a year and a half, this is now the whole of 2015 into 2016, almost every Saturday I'd be at her house for fellowship and breakfast and prayer. It was just consistently holding her before God, not from a distance saying, I'm praying for you, because that was my assignment. It was more of, you show up and you pray with her. You uphold her before God. So I got to know a different side of her, not because of what I was reading or anything like that. It was God literally made a way for me to sit in front of someone who I had no, connection with previously. And all he told me was uphold her before me in prayer. And we'd do that together consistently, even when, like it was basically consistently for many Saturdays. And that was my introduction to her. Not from what she had done, because I had already seen her work and read about it, but it was introduction in the Spirit, that this is who this person is in the Spirit. Now, by the time, this is now into 2016, by the time she decides to go run, for governor in Kirinyaga, or rather initially Nairobi and then governor in Kirinyaga, that's her story, so I won't tell it. I was there throughout that process to be able to basically still maintain my role. The only brief I had is uphold her in prayer. So through the decisions, through the madness, through the drama, through the headlines, it was just maintain her in prayer, uphold her before me in prayer. So we get to...
First of all, let me say it's so important that you have shared your story, because there's nothing about your character that is changing. So it's just the people who are coming in. If I told you start this story from the beginning, and you tell me, oh, God told me to go and pray for governor, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. Because this even me, he's telling me to go pray for
for whoever.
But this has been your story through the ups, through the downs,
and it was a seemingly difficult thing for me to do, because I didn't know why he wanted me to do that. Like, why are you thrusting me in the middle of something that is so chaotic at the time, And one thing that I forgot to mention is, remember when I met her, I think it was the second time when I was meeting her, the third time, she then asked me, what are you doing with yourself? Trying to get to know me a bit more. And I said, okay, I'm doing this program. I told her my whole struggle with governance. And then she said, you could try an opportunity in government to see how you feel about it, because sometimes that exposure affirms in your spirit or in your mind that this is the thing you want to do. The way you do internship or apprenticeship, so that you're able to know, is this what I really want to do? So there was an opportunity, because as a minister, you're able to appoint or recommend different people. There was an opportunity for appointment to different places. And that's how I ended up on the youth board, because it was a proposal of, I said, I'm interested in government. And I said that I would want that experience or exposure, because I'm in corporate, I haven't had to leave yet. I just want to know, what is this animal called government? And the opportunity came up, and that's how I ended up there. And that was towards the end of, I think, 2014. And I remember, literally, it was November 2014.
Was that with
the youth fund?
With Bruce Odhiambo, was he heading it?
Yes, he was the chairman at the time.
Yes, okay.
So I literally joined in 2014, around November. And then in 2015, February, it was disbanded because of the previous issues they had had. So, and for me, I had just gotten excited about government, literally, because I thought, oh my God, we actually have a fund that can help young people, that young people can come with ideas and get funded. But then I saw how it was being, let me not say mismanaged, but then it wasn't attaining to the potential that it could have. Remember, I'm coming from corporate.
Yep.
I'm coming with the mentality.
And targets.
I'm thinking there has to be repayment. If they're not repaying, there's a reason why. And I found out it's because many of them were coming up with ideas that are not viable. But and if they're not viable, they won't make money. And if they don't make money, they won't be able to pay.
Yes.
So on what basis are you giving them loans?
What's the vetting process for them to get?
Precisely, and it was a revolving fund. So now those kind of things began to intrigue me. But lo and behold, shortly after that, there was too much drama, and I said, this is the other side of government that maybe I'm not sure about, just the drama,
And was that what showed you, this is the actually, there's something that you said that is so huge. You saw the problems and how can we fix the problems if this vetting process is wrong? But us from the outside, people who've not engaged with government, and first of all, every Kenyan has engaged with government because you need government services. but we see the monkey, we see the corruption, we see, like, that's the only narrative that is told, that even before going there, you know, that's all you've had. So you're already going there knowing, watch out, this thing is coming. So what did, I'm just saying that because you've triggered me when you've talked about, in a positive way, when you've talked about seeing a problem that maybe nobody had a solution to because corporate Kenya don't want to engage.
In fact, at the time, I began to say, can I work with the CEO to help him set structures for us to be able to streamline this thing better? And I was just thinking, in fact, at some point, one or two of the board members were telling me, you'd be really good for this job. But in my head, I'm thinking, hell no. I just want to help. I just want to help, you know? But I could see the opportunity. I could see the potential. I could see the areas that we're not being efficient and where we could just tweak a little bit and become efficient, because I could see the vision that the people who set up the fund had and the potential that it could have. But you know, sometimes, especially in government, you have the vision bearers, say, let's say the president, but if you don't have the right foot soldiers, the ideas will be curtailed and, you know, they'll just be steel butts because they're great ideas but wrong execution.
Company A, you are the visionary needed a helper. Yeah. And the helper is somebody who will run with the vision.
Precisely. And that's what also happened in Company B, because I came to make sure that the targets that are being set, the people that are entrusted to achieve those targets are also like working towards them. So by the time, okay, I'm not getting there yet. So by this time, when I'm being exposed to government, this was my like 4-month stint in this is what Youth Fund is, this is a sample of what government is. And that was the whole story I needed to know in a way of government, because I saw huge potential, but areas, a lot of inefficiency that could be tweaked to actually achieve the intention that that was set for the fund in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So I'm praying with her. And this is now 2016, end of 2016. Of course, she's now got into election. I would go during the campaign period to hang out with her, and I was like, I don't even know how you do this, you know? So I'm praying with her, and this is now 2016, end of 2016. Of course, she's now got into election. I would go during the campaign period to hang out with her, and I was like, I don't even know how you do this, you know? So it was a different experience for me altogether.
Of course, you rightfully said it's her story to tell, but from your experience, what was those things that, because now you're talking about campaigning outside Nairobi, what was that experience for you like?
First of all, it's campaigning outside of Nairobi, and then it's a woman campaigning. That's a whole different story altogether. Maybe I'll write a book about it. But women in politics go through a whole different experience compared to men in politics. You know, like for her, because she was principled, there are things that she wouldn't do, like hang out late because you want to convince a certain group of people to do or to support you and all that stuff. What men can do, you know, men can easily go and hang out for hours on end without necessarily like being held to other responsibilities that a woman would be held responsible to, you know, and other things that I think, like I said, it's her story to tell, so I don't want to steal that line, to steal that show from her.
But from your perspective, I mean, what were you learning? What are you beginning to see and be like, okay, fine?
First of all, I watched her transition from a technocrat to a politician, and I thought, wow. You know, it was a different, politics is a different ballgame altogether. You can't go there with English per se. You have to go there with the, you know, the grassroots. When they say vitu kwa ground is different, you have to be able to relate with the people. You have to be able to engage with them in a way that they understand what you're saying. And then for her as a woman, you have to balance your family and your other responsibilities together with this. She was still going through a lot of challenges at the time. And for me I was watching God at work because of my process with her. Because you remember, my assignment is pray her through this process. And all I'm thinking is, God, I hope that she makes it. I hope that she, you know, gets this, so that it's a testimony of the thing that she's been through. Because she too was really believing God for her story to turn around. And being at the forefront, watching that happen at the time was, in my view, an amazing and invaluable experience for me.
This is so powerful. majority of the people who are watching this, and majority I mean 99.99999% of the people, we only have a one-sided view of Governor Anne Waiguru, and that is the view that the media has played. I call this channel Clean the Airwaves very intentionally because I understand the power of media in terms of shaping narratives and perceptions of how we view people. If every single media station in this country tells one story from one side of the coin, whether it's true or not, that's the only side people will see.
Will believe, yeah.
Will believe, right or wrong, that's the only side they'll believe. But that doesn't change the coin from having heads and tails.
Yeah.
To make the whole coin, you can't just talk about the heads perspective. So hearing your narrative already is boggling my mind.
For me, again, I mean, I would say that if it was in a different interview, in the sense that it's the power of media indeed, you know, in the power of the stories that are told. And having now worked, which I'll explain later on, having worked in that space with media and in the political space, you get to see how narratives are skewed towards one direction to make the populace believe that side of the story. So for me, it was, if you ask me today, you know, what is this true or is it not true? At that point for me, it doesn't matter. You understand? Because I'm on a different assignment altogether. You know, it's like being asked, is Jesus the Son of God at that point? Or the disciples were being asked to testify of things that everyone else was saying, this guy is claiming to be. But their experiences, in fact, the one thing that I would say was, like that man who was healed by Christ. You know, he says, for me, I was blind and now I see. I don't care whether he operates by this and this. It's almost like my tunnel vision is God. If God tells me, do X, Y, Z, whether I like it, I want to, I believe, or I what, that's like besides the point. It's the ability to embrace the mind of God and then to have that unique experience with God. Throughout that journey, regardless of what everyone else is saying, because I did get all those kind of, you know, questions like, okay, what are you doing?
Yes,
especially because you're a prim and proper girl. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like,
and that's what I'm telling you. I'm loving that. So first of all, two things. First and foremost, there's something that you've said, and automatically you have broken barriers in my mind, because I understand. You've talked about the transition from minister to politician. Like that already, remove everything else, is brilliance on its own. Because that shows the amount of commitment, hard work, skill somebody has to be able to enter the mind frame where they can do that.
And remember, at this time, God is also dealing with her. That's the other thing that people don't know about it. For me to be there, it means that there's something that God is doing with her. And so she's literally fighting off a whole lot of things on the outside, but trying to the best of her ability to maintain that this is something that God wants her to do as well, you know? And so it's not just doing it because it's a next best thing to do, to take advantage of the fame that has, you know, come of it. But it was, I need to do this because I sense in my spirit I need to do it. In fact, the day the conversation started that you know, she needs or she wants to run, it was more of, okay, that's the thing you want to do, then we bring it before God in prayer and incubate it, because that was my role. Like I said, incubate it, hold it before God until it becomes whatever He wants it to be. And that's as much that I think we should.
Yes, but for your story, what's blowing me is, because again, it's your story, but it's the same narrative that has been there throughout. There's, what is this Chile doing? Like, doesn't she read the newspapers? What, you get what I mean?
At this point, I mean, if you look at everything that I've talked about, there's no one in my life at that point that could tell me something that would sway me from what God was telling me. And the people that would have the kind of voice to influence me would already know the mind of God by the time I am aligning to something. You understand?
Okay, yeah.
So, like I said, you have to be able to safeguard yourself to stick to what God, and like I said at the beginning, the path to walking with God will always take you through controversial pathways,
this was controversial,
lonely pathways, and very demanding on your flesh, on your time, on your mind, but it's extremely rewarding, and the highest reward is God Himself.
Would you say you're feeling extremely rewarded from the time that you had?
Beyond a shadow of doubt.
Okay.
And the reward cannot even be quantified by things that men can get. You know, the assurance when God says, "This is my begotten Son in whom I am well pleased." I live for that. You know, I strive for that, to hear him say, I'm actually proud of you. I'm happy with you. I'm pleased with you. And that's what faith is. When you read about the whole, you know, the whole of Hebrews 11, we're told in many times, the way we've been taught faith, it's that it's a thing you have to do. No. It's a thing you respond to when God actually quickens you to do something. When he says that by faith, Abraham, you know, left his father's house and, you know, went into a land that he did not know about. Or by faith, Noah built an ark. It's by faith. It means that when they had God, they built an ark. When they had God, they did. When they had God, they did. So my life has always been, when I hear God, I do, regardless of all the other jamboree and stuff around it.
Okay, back to the continuation of your journey. So now you're witnessing this whole, you're understanding what it takes to be you're witnessing politics at works.
Not yet. Okay, yes.
No, in terms of
yeah.
From a distance, but in terms of campaigns.
Yes.
So
campaigns.
Okay, go on.
So this is now end of 2017 to 28. I mean, end of 2016 into 2017. So
you're still at company B. First of all, I love that you say that you're not. In the beginning I was like, man, she should mention what company these are because if guys know, guys would know. You get. But now it hits me like, for you the focus isn't the brand recognition of where that you have worked.
It's God.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's a consistency to it, in the sense that I might as well have been in Somalia, the story doesn't change.
Yes.
I might as well be in a company that has no name or has a name, the story doesn't change. It's my story with God. It's like the way you can have props. So everything else for me is a prop. Yeah. So I get into this space now in 2017. And at the beginning of 2017, I begin to hear God saying, there's a position reserved for you in this government. Like, there's something that I'm leading you into. So I'm like, what? I was very comfortable supporting and, you know, giving strength and all that. But then I never saw that coming. And I didn't think it was that soon. So I struggled with it for the longest time. And I remember in March, not March, but around May or June that year, I'm praying with some friends of mine or people that I used to pray with. And this girl gets up and she tells me the exact same thing. I mean, she didn't know. I hadn't shared with anyone. And she begins to speak over me to say many things. And then in the middle of it just says, God says there's a position that is reserved for you. You know about it, and it's in this government and da-da-da. And she goes on. And I just said, Lord, I've heard you. And so I didn't know how it would come. And so I begin to now warm myself up to, okay, we have to get into government. I don't know how this is going to happen. Remember, there's a transition to a new government.
Yes.
So...
and you're still in corporate?
I'm still in corporate.
You're still doing your job?
At this time, by the way, I was the chief operating officer of the group.
Yeah.
So I had risen through various ranks. I was doing very well.
You got to see.
I was very comfortable. I was very happy with myself.
You were doing well. I'm not saying you're not doing well.
By the standards of men, yes. I was doing very well.
Like, what?
So this, again, God comes and he's like, adios, girl. We got to get out of here. So...
No, hold on, Sellah. You got to COO.
Absolutely. In the group. So it was a big deal. So anyway...
Even me, I didn't know who was interviewed. By the standards of men.
Yeah, by the standards of men. So I...
Congrats. I'm how do I say this? I don't want to at any moment degrade or demeanor what it meant that you were doing. The amount of people and roles and responsibilities that come with that position. That's why it is mind-blowing for me. Yeah. This talks about and first of all, I want people to understand the kind of skill set that you have. How many people, let's just randomly talk about this, just to show people how much God elevated you. Yeah. You get what I mean? Let me say this in this way. Sometimes in our humility, Christian humility, it's okay for you, but it can hide the glory of just what God has done in your life. Make sense?
Yeah.
So, random converse. How many people are we talking under you?
Okay, to give you an idea, this is a group of companies that had schools, that had the telecoms operation, which was the largest in Kenya at the time. supporting Safaricom in terms of network deployment and building masts and all that stuff. One of the biggest. Then we had just got into real estate when affordable housing was starting. There was an interest in what do you call it, technology. So there was like different stuff that was going on. So you have multiple employees or people that are reporting to you at the same time. But for me, it wasn't like a big deal because, you know, I had been there this is 2010 to now 2017. So I had been there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just needed to, and this is in multiple countries.
Yes. Well, we had scaled down quite a bit because, you know, as the telecom sector began to mature, there was a lot of consolidation and all that stuff. So you consolidate for your own good as well.
Yeah.
Because of maintaining your profits. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of work, but then for very little money.
But you see, even that understanding and that fact that you've been there for, what, 7 years?
9 at the time.
9 years at the time.
Yeah.
Oh man, like I didn't even know that. Even me, it's triggered me in a nice way. Not triggered is the wrong word. It's like I'm like, yo, excellent. Anyway, no problem. Let's.
So, at this time, so when I'm hearing that I'm supposed to transition into government, in one of my conversations after prayer, in fact, it was a Saturday morning after prayer, I just got a sense to mention to Governor Guru, by the way, I'm interested in government. And at the time I was aiming for national government, and that's exactly what I told her. This is my sense, and I'm thinking, because I don't have any other understanding of government or even interest or remote thought that I could go anywhere other than national government. So she said, okay, she counseled me on how to go about it and said, okay, let's see, because we had just finished praying. So she told me, let's see what God does.
When you talk about national government, give me examples of what you meant that you were looking to go into.
Like PS level or state corporation. Basically, federal government, which is like your national, but because you know now at this point we have county governments as well, which is the smaller units in the different counties. So,
by the way, just for the record, I think you'd make a absolutely phenomenal cabinet secretary. I think you.
I know you've just endorsed, but God bless you.
No, I'm serious. And like I'm not just endorsing. Like it's just actually hit me. Like your experience and everything that you've been through in terms of your understanding of government and your understanding of corporate skills and your understanding of people from ground all the way up. You would kill it. And if any of the presidents watches this, may they endorse you. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I should say that. Hold on. Let's change some batteries. We'll be back.
Okay.
Audio rolling? Yep. Welcome back. Man, I'm not even going to do a long intro. I'm just going to say, if you are, you know why I always say this? If you're watching us from here, go and do yourself a favor and watch from the beginning. So, Sellah, the reason why I say that is because I chop these videos up into different pieces, and guys sometimes read the headlines or the title of the video. They
start with part 3.
Yes, and it's so important to understand part 1 and how this has been a running thread. And this is throughout anybody who I interview on CTA. Understand their history to understand where it is that they're going. So, over back to you. So where you've left this story, God has told you, listen, that time is coming for you to enter government. So you've accepted, but then now what you're doing is you've let Governor Anwaigoro know that, listen, I'd like something in national government. I'm thinking of something in national government. Then she's mentoring you on that basis.
So she guides me on how to, like if I'm thinking of getting into government, how to approach it the right way and all that stuff. So anyway, so this was now around June of 2017, and of course the elections were coming in. So we focused on the elections. I go to Kiri to help Kirinyaga to help her.
Kiri.
We had to try and funkify it, because it was also psychological for, oh my God. Anyway, So we go to, I mean, we're doing the campaigns, and I used to be in her car when we're going around, and we're looking outside and like, guy, are you sure? I'd ask her like, what? You just had to, of all jobs to pick, this is what you saw, because the place was in a mess at the time.
Yes.
No tarmac, no nothing. It was just a disaster. So anyway, she wins, and I remember just before that, like a day or a few days before she had won, and we're going now for inauguration, and of course she needs someone to help put it together and to help her, because there are many people helping, but then now someone to just be with her and to make sure the speech is done, because I was now supporting remotely, doing a lot of support work in terms of comms and just different other things.
And full-time working.
Oh yeah. So anyway,
as COO.
yeah. I mean, you get people working, then you have your own time and all. So anyway, but I would do the visit to the counties over the weekend. So I remember this particular day, one of the guys I was working with said, Sellah, you'd make a great chief of staff. I looked at him and said, what? Do you know what a chief of staff does? Do you even know? And he, of course, he knew, but then he was telling me, I think you'd make a great support for the governor. And the governor got to hear about it. And then this particular time when we were planning for the inauguration, long story short, she says, please come and help me. Like, just come and sort out, So I had to make sure, I naturally got into the space. You handle this, you make sure this, coordinate this, align this, make sure the speech is done, make sure the media is briefed, all that stuff. And I didn't even know what I was doing, but I just got into the flow of it. And it came up that, you will need a chief of staff. And then she says, by the way, can we talk about that? And that was history, by the way. That was like, of course, I had to go back to God and ask. And by this time, I already started having a feeling that God was pointing me towards this. And that is why the process of preparation in the spiritual for praying with her. In fact, the picture he gave me was that as you go in as chief of staff, you're actually going in the same capacity of the role you've been playing, supporting her in the spiritual, but now just shifting it to a place where you actually have a position. And the position is an excuse for you to continue upholding her. So that's the understanding I went in with at the time. Now, remember, I'm coming from corporate. I'm doing very well as COO in a group of companies. I'm living in Nairobi. I have no basis or reason to move to the opposite side, to a place, to Kiri. It's not even my home county. I come from a different culture altogether.
Yes. You can't speak the language.
I can't speak the language, and to top it up, the pay was like, I don't even know. You know the way there's a stare, like, yeah. So, I mean, it took a couple of conversations to help me like understand what I was getting myself into. But the more I sat with it, I'm having a physical conversation, but there's another conversation going on, and God is like, yep, that is it. That is what I've been preparing you for. So this was the whole Abraham experience. For let go of your father's house, everything that you know, everything that is familiar.
Wow.
And of course, being chief of staff, you have to live in the county. You have to be present to do the work. And that's, my whole life just changed like that. And I always say, both to the people there and the ones that I left, so to speak, that if it was not for God, I would never have had the grace to do the job. Because you'd constantly be missing home. I mean, this is a rural county. It's not even Mombasa or Nakuru. This is a rural county. There's a lot of work to be done. You're going to work with someone who is determined to change the county. So there's a lot of work, and you're literally, as the chief of staff, you're the right-hand person that executes and ensures that everything is done, from communication to day-to-day operations, everything, agriculture, everything this. You're coordinating everyone. You're handling everything. External stakeholders, internal stakeholders, managing the brand, managing the communication, making sure she's okay, her personal stuff, all that stuff is on you. And I'm coming from private sector as a COO. Where
you are the one who had your own chief of staffs.
It was a different experience altogether, and God literally thrust me into the unknown. Yeah. I didn't know government. You're going to work with someone who's won accolades. And so you have to up your game and up it very fast. And I cannot stress this enough, that if God did not lead me there, it took God for me to let go of everything, to follow him into something that did not make sense at the time. And didn't make sense to anyone. Everyone is asking you, where are you going? Do you even know where the county is? Okay, so are you going to be staying there? Are you going to be living? Okay, all your support structure, family, friends, everything that you know is here. The only person that you know going there is the governor. So how is it that you're going to, and you're there 5 days a week, sometimes 6, if they need to go to church or there's an event over the weekend, how will you manage? And all I can say is that it took God for me to be able to do that. And the assurance, especially when times would get tough, because in county government, the capacity is not the same as, in terms of skills and capacity, is not the same as national government. The kind of people that you get there, you have to work with them quite a bit. And then you have someone whose standards are here. So, and you're the intermediary to make sure that the reports are up to scratch, the work is done well, and she's not stopping. So you have to, as you're learning, you're also making sure that everyone else is getting up to speed. And for me, it was a phenomenal experience in God, because I got to know myself better in God, because I then had to rely on Him to do the work. And the grace was definitely available.
So when you talk about the grace, does this, I mean, this is a day-to-day grace. One of the things that happened, and I just want to understand, because the impeachment came over that time. As you've been seeing, I'm not asking it from her perspective. I'm asking it from your perspective, if you're okay to share that.
The thing I would say about that experience, because I mean, that's just one of the many experiences. God sort of like thrust me into the boiling pot of politics.
Yes.
So you have to figure yourself, you have to have an anchor.
I mean, there's so much.
So much, but it was also a learning experience for me that I wouldn't trade for anything else. But one of the things that I figured or I experienced was, there are many young or just brilliant Kenyans who would love to serve in government. People who have the skills, who have the right attitude, the right motive and all that, they would love to serve in government. But because sometimes of the things that happen or the collateral damage that happens in government, you've gone there for your own intentions, but the minute now, because politicians are okay with it, sometimes it even works to their advantage when they're bashed and exposed, and or not really exposed, but when certain things happen to them. From a political standpoint, there's a way you can swing it, which I came to learn in the process of time.
Yes.
But for someone who has no interest in politics and you've gone there to do the work, and sometimes it can cost you your reputation, your career, your brand. And that discourages a lot of people from getting into government and serving. But you see, for me, I didn't have that luxury, because the driving point or the driving force for me was not my desire to preserve my name or preserve my reputation or my brand. Like when we went through the impeachment, everyone is asking me, like, why did you go there? This is now going to cost you. Now you can't do. In my head, I'm thinking, all this drama compared to pleasing God, in terms of Him wanting me to be there, is nothing. I would do it all over again if it would please Him, because I know I was exactly where He wanted me to be at the time. And like there's no conversation there, But it's unfortunate that many people who are absolutely brilliant and would be amazing in government get discouraged because they think, hey, and then Sujui ESCC comes after me, Sujui who comes after me, and they just wilt or they just opt out because they're like, I've built my career to a certain point, I wouldn't want to trash it in a few months because of something that you're always dragged into, or sometimes maybe dragged into, that is not true, but it's good for politics.
Man, like, I cannot stress the importance of hearing your backstory. Your backstory, when you now talk about, because of course I have all these questions about this time, but none of them are worth asking, because I now know and now understand it from your history. If you hadn't told me your history, I would be like, so how on earth did you do this BBI thing? Were you siding with these things? Or what happens, whatever? What happens when you disagree with the governor? And what happens with this? But these things don't make that much, they don't have that much value. My questions, honestly speaking to you, don't have that much value anymore, because I understand it's coming from the obedience perspective. You've explained the obedience perspective when you're being elevated, and I put that in quotes, maybe from the financial perspective, accolades and all of these other things, but you've still been the same Sellah.
And God tells you.
when God tells
seemingly.
You. And remember, again, I've seen you, I've had the privilege of meeting you once or twice during this Kiri time. You get what I mean? When you've been this and now, and I'm like, okay, Sellah, you're not changing. I don't feel like you have changed, and by that I mean your core person, that core person of who it is that you are. Okay, so I'll let you say whatever else that it is that you want to speak about this season of time, and then we can proceed to where the story goes next.
So again, the same process that I went through. Like I said, for me, God operates with me in seasons. When he began to tell me, okay, you know, this time is actually going to come to an end as well.
Did you want to quit
and
before?
The vision,
are there times that you decided, like, you know what, I've had it?
The surprising thing is, even when I did feel like that, the reminder of why I'm there, like, first of all, that thought wouldn't feature in the sense of even frustration or anything like that. Even when you're frustrated, like there's another source of energy that comes, because you know there's a higher reason for which you're there, and you cannot afford to faint or give up or exit before he says it's time. So you're not there of your own volition, you know, you didn't take yourself there.
Yeah.
So there was a certain grace, and I cannot even explain it, the grace to learn government within a short period of time, the grace to excel at it, the grace to push in terms of targets, the grace to do the same thing you are still doing, because as chief of staff, you're also the senior most advisor in terms of influencing the direction of that the governor will take, or the principal will take in this case.
In proxy, you have the ear of the president.
Precisely. Well, yeah.
I'm being honest.
In that case, then
yes.
Again, for me, that was also a point of caution, because the thing was, you have to be able to constantly bring God to the table and constantly remind them of, especially because I had been there before they got into the position. It was a process of, let's watch over the thing that God wanted to do from the onset. So my role, more than advising on work-related stuff, which I would still do, was more of, let's maintain the thing that God wants to do in this nation. Because I know that's one of the things that she kept on asking of God in prayer, that there's a place that God wants to take us as a nation. And my prayer as well was, God has to raise the right people. And if he's going to raise the right people, he has to find people he can trust with his assignment, his will, his counsel over the nation. And he's the one who will open those doors. He's the one who will lead you into those opportunities and positions. But when you're there, just like Esther, you cannot afford to forget why you're there. You cannot afford to now get to the position of comfort or luxury, to the point where you forget that the one who put you there didn't put you because you're beautiful, didn't put you because you're qualified. He actually put you because he has a reason. There's a time that will come that salvation of the nation will be required, and it is your neck that will be required on the line, so to speak.
Okay, I may sound like a broken record, or you may sound like a broken record in terms of how you give this answer, but it's still fine. What advice would you give to, I'll say, two groups of people? First of all, young people with a heart for government, and number two, actually three people: young people with a heart for government, women with a heart for entering into this government and political space, and lastly, or the third, not lastly, but the third group of people who are excelling in corporate Kenya, who have a tag to come into this space. Because I feel like you can offer some wisdom there.
So to the young people who are passionate, I guess, for God, and also would want to get into government, first of all,
actually three people: young people with a heart for government, women with a heart for entering into this government and political space, and lastly, or the third, not lastly, but the third group of people who are excelling in corporate Kenya, who have a tag to come into this space. Because I feel like you can offer some wisdom there. So
to the young people who are passionate, I guess, for God, and also would want to get into government, first of all, for all the categories, I wouldn't advise anyone to get into anything without God leading them, because you will struggle at one point or the other, regardless of how well you do. You will reach a point, it's called in economics the principle of diminishing returns. You will do well until a certain point where your grace cannot take you beyond where you've reached. So there has to be another kind of grace that excels or that takes you farther than where you can reach as a human being. So to the young people, I would say there are amazing opportunities right now in government, especially because of devolution and the increased number of, because of the county governments, there's places to start. Unlike previously when we were centralized as a government, there were very few positions. In fact, all of us would know who the minister is, would know who the assistant minister is. But nowadays, you almost have to pause to remember. And if you're not in government, sometimes you may not know, because we've just become so many, because there's governors, senators, MPs, etc. But now there are many opportunities. So start somewhere and then build your network and build your process, I would say, with God, but also just build your skills and your competency and get to know government. Because government is an animal, it's huge, but then you have to figure yourself through the process. To the women, I'm excited about the number of women who've gotten into this particular government, especially through elective position as opposed to nomination. It says something about our country and where we're headed so far, or rather right now. I would say that, especially for the governors, the number of women governors that I've gotten there, having worked with a female governor who was one of the first, and a first in many ways.
Who was the governor? Did we have a female governor before?
No.
We didn't, huh?
No. So, I mean, it was a learning curve in so many ways of just sort of like trying to navigate a process that was largely men, and then being able to learn through, how to mainstream or gender mainstream that whole process and all that. So for the women, I think that there's a lot of warming up now to women leadership. For the ones who've gotten in, I would say you have to be able to give Kenyans a reason to vote for more women. Let them see the alternative, because it's one thing to say let's vote for women, but sometimes the ones who are already there, you have to demonstrate what you can do as a woman leader, so that your gender is never the issue when it comes to voting. The young people are open to voting, but then we need to also give them a reason to be able to see you're a role model that can actually influence and do better, and sometimes even better, or do what men can do, and sometimes even better, because I believe that that's possible. And just staying on the subject of women, many times we've been constricted to a certain definition of who we are supposed to be or how we are supposed to be, because of how society has defined the female. But I believe that one of the greatest secrets that is yet to be discovered is the actual female who's been restored, and a woman who actually understands the original intent that God had in his mind. For God to say everything was perfect and everything was good, and then he still says, but I still need something else, and introduces the woman. But that woman did not live up to the standard that was expected of her because of the, like we say, the desire and the door that was open for darkness. It means that there's still a version of a woman that is supposed to be revealed. When you look at Adam, and I'll come back to the last category of people, to the men, we'll get to that, or to the professionals who want to get into government. When you look at Adam and what he had done, by the time God is entrusting a man to be able to name animals or to give identity to beings, there's a certain level he's operating at. And so the woman, when she's introduced as a helper, she's supposed to top it up. She's supposed to bring and introduce something else beyond what the man can do. But that potential, I believe, was curtailed in the garden because of what darkness saw, or because of what Satan saw the woman is capable of doing. So she was reduced, in my view, reduced to like just an animal, in terms of reduced to just being one that just gives birth, like just for the sake of. Unless you introduce God, let me just clarify that it's, scripture says she became a living being, but there's a point where you can get to where you become a life-giving spirit, in the sense that you now connect with the mind of God in a way that you're able to introduce his mind on earth. And that's a place that I feel like women ought to aspire to get to the point where we've seen what men can do, and there's a reason why they're always considered the preferred, or the ones that have attained to certain positions before women get there. But it's because there's still an awaited version of women that are supposed to now be revealed or made manifest. And that's a whole different subject that I think is important for any woman, regardless of whether you know God or don't, should be able to understand.
That's powerful. And how do you think the women attain there? There's no other it doesn't sound like there's any other way for the women to attain that default stage. And default, I mean at the creation of Eve from the rib. It
can't happen outside of God.
Yes.
Yeah. Because he's the creator, he's the one who knows the potential inside of you. So unless you connect to him in a way that you're able to bring forth, and it's a process of walking with him that actually reveals that. And there are many examples in scripture, but that's a whole different sermon, a subject that I absolutely love and I wouldn't get into right now. Okay. But I believe that there's a version of a woman that can actually connect to the original intent and the mind of God, and then produce or bring forth wisdom and counsel and new stuff that has not been seen or heard. And that's what we ought to all strive towards as women.
Yep. And I would add and say, I think men want it.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go on. We'll talk about that one off camera. Third group of...
So the third group of people is corporates or professionals who want to get into government, but they're not sure of it. I would say, again, there are many opportunities to test, just like what happened for me. The minute I tested the whole youth fund thing, I was still a professional, doing very well in corporate, but then I got the opportunity to serve on a board, part-time, that exposed me to corporate. Sometimes that exposure gives you the understanding of, okay, this could be for me or not for me. But sometimes it's also, if you really are called to do something, then your reputation should be the last thing that you're thinking about, especially because, like I said at the beginning, the enemy will use fear to hold you back from entering into the thing that God has assigned for you. So if you know God is calling you into government or into public service, because it is a service and it is a calling in my view, the other things shouldn't really matter. And if you don't know God, then perhaps that could be the place that could unleash your fullest potential. But because of fear and because of watching what other people have gone through, then you could be holding yourself back. But I strongly believe that I think things are changing, and things will definitely change with this new government. I believe that we're getting into a space where you'll not be victimized because of your affiliation in terms of politics or affiliation in terms of the position that you take in terms of your stand in whichever direction. I think that things are changing, and I choose to believe they're changing. Because we can't go backwards or regress, and we can't maintain where we are, because we constantly have to, even as a nation, consistently push ourselves to be better, because we can do better. Okay,
let's progress with this. So, first of all, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for that advice. Where does the story then go next?
So again, like I said, the same God who constantly shows up in different ways. The process that began with me transitioning from private sector to governance or politics in that sense. So I sort of like served throughout that term. And then a few months ago, I knew, and we both knew, the governor and I always knew, that there would be a transition around this time for me to get into something else. My role was, my place rather, or my position has always been to discover who I am and to always follow the leading of God wherever he leads me. So, inevitably, I then had to transition from what I was doing into something else. So towards earlier this year, he began to put in my heart to do something that was completely off, like left field to who I am. And this was to get involved in the governance, or rather to get involved in the election space as far as young people are concerned. And that's when this whole process of Zinduka, it had been sort of like boiling in my spirit throughout the whole of last year. But January, it was just more of, you have to do this. So from in a part-time way, I began to engage young people. So basically, Zinduka was to get young people to get registered as voters, first of all. And then secondly, to make sure that their needs and their issues are raised to the right leaders, and that the leaders who are coming, that they're able to hold those leaders accountable, like, as opposed to leaders just coming and asking for votes. The question was, we know that you normally come and ask for votes, but how do we hold you accountable beyond the election period? And then how do we know that what you're promising you're going to deliver? So that, just giving them that platform to be able to engage the leaders, and that's what Zinduka was doing.
So my name is Amisa. I'm a mental health by profession. I'm a counseling psychologist. I'm also a master's student doing public policy and management. And my issue today is to talk about mental health state of the Kenyan youth. Most of us here, we have experienced different mental health challenges. Sometimes we are depressed, sometimes we are stressed, sometimes we have different mental health issues that we don't know how to go about it. And yes, the government has done a lot of things. Recently, we saw the president coming up with breaking the groundbreaking of Madare Mental Health Hospital. We have the mental health bill has been passed. But my request to the upcoming government is that we need to have intentional involvement of youth in this mental health task force to ensure that mental health is not talked about us when we are not involved in those decision-making table. And we are hoping to get the next president who will make sure that we don't have a country whereby we have a lot of mental health cases and there is no solution to it.
Thank you for that. So I did that for a while.
So first and foremost, let me just say, that shocked me. Because knowing you, even your social media, I think, has 2 pictures. Like,
well, not 2.
Then you've done better now. Like, getting in front of the camera, even coming to CTA.
Yeah.
It's this, all the time I've known you, this was not even on the table. You get what I mean?
I was very comfortable in the background.
Yes.
Pushing paper, just doing my work incognito and just focused on what needs to be done.
Even if guys see the governor, you're not there. You're not at Yuko next to her in any photo. You know what I mean? What I mean by that, it's you about the work. So by the time you're coming in front of the camera, that shocked me.
Yeah.
You get what I mean? Mm-hmm. That shocked me. In fact, I was like, what's going on here? But knowing you, I knew there was something.
With God.
Yes. I knew there's something bigger than what it is that I may think. Yeah.
So, like I said, I did Zinduka for a while, and it's now morphing into something else, which I'll talk about on my platform.
So guys can right now go and subscribe to Zinduka.
Yes, Zinduka Kenya on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter.
Okay, what does Zinduka mean? Awaken,
come alive. Basically, Isaiah 60, arise and shine. Like your opportune time has come and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Noted.
So I knew that God had begun to quicken my spirit about a transition, and so I was doing this part-time so that I can be able to transition into what he wanted me to, because also this was like something that he placed in my heart to do. And at the same time, there was now an introduction of something that I called Jacob's Ladder, which was an organization that I formed, which is more focused on climate change in terms of getting young people to take advantage of the opportunities in the green economy. And climate change basically is an amazing opportunity that Africa needs to take advantage of, but is little spoken about and little known by especially young people. But there's a lot of not just job opportunities, but employment opportunities in terms of actually creating employment. There's a lot of innovation that can happen, but that's only to people who know about it. And so I co-founded this organization to basically get young people to get to know about the opportunities in climate change, and then to get them to have the right skills to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So we're developing a curriculum, we're having grassroots organizations. We've done a baseline survey because I believe in data in terms of using data to intervene and address issues that are actually tangible. So we're doing a lot of stuff, and you can check out all that stuff on my LinkedIn page.
Okay. Is there a website for that right now at the moment?
Yes, www.jacobsladder.africa.
Africa. Who's your co-founder?
She's called Bilhan Durango. Yes. Someone you should have on CT,
I know.
by the way.
Bilhan is a mover and shaker.
She's a mover and shaker.
She's definitely a mover and shaker. I know a lot about her.
Excellent.
Yes.
So that's where I am right now. And my like I would say throughout my whole story, the one thing that will not change regardless of where I go is the assurance that God is doing something with me and has continued to build that story. I'm also discovering as I go along. So I'm excited to see what the next chapter of my life will be.
Yeah. I don't think you're done with government in my view. I'm being very serious, and that's just a hunch that I'm getting. Like, without a doubt, your skills, and I'll say it again, hopefully this should reach the powers that be. Like, your skills are phenomenal for bringing about change in this country from a perspective of national government. That's just my belief. There's no way that you can have all that experience. I feel like the period with the amazing governor Anoigoro was like your training ground. And when I hear your story, that's how I feel. Like, so I'm just like, I'm excited to see what the future holds for you. Can I ask you an honest question? What's the state of corruption, and is there hope for dealing with it? Having an interview about government and not bringing up the conversation around corruption, it's difficult to have that in Kenya. It feels like I'm almost leaving something under the mat unswept. And I'm speaking from your lens, the lens that you've gotten probably working with national government, working with county government, working with Kenyans, because a lot of sometimes we blame the leaders, but us guys are the same guys who are hungering or giving chums to the policeman or buying these parts free because I can evade tax. I just want to understand it from your perspective in terms of where this country should be and that conversation.
Isn't it funny how we speak about corruption and it's always about in the context of governance or public sector?
Mm-hmm. I just want to understand it from your perspective in terms of where this country should be and that conversation.
Isn't it funny how we speak about corruption and it's always about in the context of governance or public sector?
Mm-hmm.
You hardly hear of corruption in the private sector. So the question is why? Because in actual sense, it's not true. Because government does not, corruption does not happen within governments.
Yes.
There's always other players that...
The guys winning the tenders 99% of the time are not
private
they're
sector,
private sector.
you know? So, and then you take it further.
Yes, I like the way you say
Take it
like that.
further into, for example, you know the number of times you go to park somewhere and the askari that's helping you park your car is saying, okay, don't worry, I'll watch for you. Meanwhile, it's his job. But he says, don't worry, I'll watch for you. And they're over greeting you because they're expecting that by the time you're coming back, you will give them something. It's a culture. It's something that we have propagated because it's acceptable, but we only label it as corruption when it comes to government. But in actual corruption, the word corruption or the essence of corruption starts in the heart of man. Corruption would not happen if you in your heart, you're not desirous of something that you would otherwise not attain if you were to follow the process. If we're all to work by merit, we always feel like you won't qualify and therefore you have to circumvent to be able to get through. But if the systems and the processes were working, both in terms of private, in terms of the citizens abiding by the standards and the laws that have been set, and then the government actually enforcing, corruption wouldn't happen. I'll use the example of Dubai. They normally say that the reason why they reduce the rate of corruption is because there's no human interaction. So you almost have to remove human interaction and only deal on, what is it called, a virtual way, or whether it's payment for services and all that, so that there's no corruption. But in actual sense, man will always find a way around the system. So we can't deal, in my view, with the issue of corruption unless you deal with the hearts of men. And you cannot regulate the hearts of men. You can't legislate the hearts of men. You can't tell, don't do X, Y, Z. Somehow your mind, your heart, your being naturally will want to do something to advance yourself, because that's the nature of sin that we were born into. You want to advance, you prefer yourself, you prefer your family. That's why many people, when they get into a position, the next person they're looking for, if there's an opportunity, is there, their friend. Unless there's a way that's managed, but in actual sense, there's a way that we always prefer ourselves, our family, the people that we have linkages to. So you can't regulate or legislate corruption. You can't deal with corruption outside of dealing with the mind and the heart of a man. And that can only happen when there's a certain, and it can't even happen by reason of morality.
Yes.
It's not even a moral issue.
Yes.
This is a heart issue. And the heart is desperately wicked above all things. So while we speak about corruption, there has to be a heightened awareness, in my view, of a restoration to why you're doing it in the first place. That's the reason why you're doing whatever you're doing has to be higher than just self-preservation, accumulating for yourself. It started in the garden. You know, when Cain was like preferring himself over his brother. And we only allow, or rather corruption only thrives when we think that the resources are few And therefore, I have to accumulate as much as I can for myself, because the more I get for myself, the lesser my brother has. You understand? But if we change that mentality, which again cannot happen by reason of laws, there's no amount of laws that will reduce corruption, in my view. Not in this country, not even in the countries that claim to have no corruption. Because while that's the picture and the narrative,
I mean, it's hidden corruption.
it's hidden corruption. It happens. So I think that there's a way that the hearts of men have to be dealt with, and that can only happen, in my view, divine intervention, and God just changing the hearts of it. Because there are groups and caucuses of people in which people actually prefer one another. It's possible. But that can only happen when there's a transformed mind from the family level to an environment. I mean, look at, even in the church, sometimes that's where certain things thrive that ought not to thrive. In schools, in different places, institutions that ideally should uphold no corruption, that's where sometimes those things thrive and they shouldn't. So it has to start from a very tender age, first of all, but it also has to start from a different level altogether, away from morality and what is right or wrong.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. So what's next for Sellah?
I guess you'd have to stick around to see.
I love it.
All I know, it's going to be big.
All you know is going to be big.
Yeah.
Okay, not a single problem. Parting shot. Like, I want you to, first and foremost, thank you so much. Like, I even feel like this. What do you mean it's at the end? I'm trying to look for random questions from the sky.
I'm not that old.
I'm trying to look for random questions from the sky so that I can keep this conversation going. But I just want to honor you and just tell you thank you so much. Thank you so much because of coming to sit here. Thank you so much because you have honestly, and I was having a conversation with Manda, and I was saying, the thing about honestly speaking about your life, some people don't want to honestly share about their day-to-day conversations and relationship with God, even that positive side, because of the perception of how people will see them. Do you get what I mean? So you have come here and honestly shared about ups and downs of your life, for the sake, and I can see your heart, I can not see it, but feel it, see it, for the sake of the people who are watching, for them to benefit from the life that you've had. It's like I use the light that leads to the light. You're trying to reflect them to hear of your life, not to see you, not to see the big organizations and your accomplishments, but for them to see the God that has served in your life, and let them know that they have exact same access to this God as you. You've also tried to acknowledge and praise God and let him know that you're grateful for what he has done in your life by you sharing your testimony. You get? And that this conversation for me, I'm being very selfish right now, has been so thought-provoking, affirming, and challenging at the same time in terms of your sharing. So can I pray for you?
Sure.
Heavenly Father, I say thank you so much for Sellah. I thank you so much for her life. I thank you so much for what it is that you have done in your life. I thank you so much for just the journey it is that you have walked with her. I want to pray for her for her next season, whatever that may be. You are the one who knows. You are the one who has planned it. You are the one who has set it in the exact time. And I just want to bless it according to your will, according to your purpose, that it may happen. Excited to see what it is that you're going to do later on in her life, and us CTA and the viewers watching, and you guys are going to type amen in the comments. We just want to say a big thank you to her. Excited to see where her journey goes to. In the mighty name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So now you look in the camera and you just give your parting shot to anybody who may be watching you.
For everyone who's listened to my story, I know beyond a shadow of doubt that I would not have it any other way, regardless of how the number of lessons I've had to learn in terms of my walk with God, getting to know him and getting to discover myself in God. I wouldn't change it for any other thing. There's a script that we're all given about life, whether it's about your career or about family life, or everything that basically is stipulated for an average person to do or to become. But then there's another higher level where everything or every one of those things fits into God. And one of the things that I know beyond a shadow of doubt is that if I was to die today, I know God would be pleased with me. Not because I have done things, but because I have walked with him. And I'm confident to date, even to the many things that I may not have shared. I know beyond a shadow of doubt that the confidence that I have is that there's nothing greater for me, no greater value that I place on than to know that he approves of me, that he's pleased by what I'm doing and how I'm living my life. And so my prayer is for you as you're watching this and listening to this, especially for the many of us who have had those moments where God is nudging you to do something, and because of friends, because of family, because of life, because of career comfort, because of maybe the journey that you've already walked through, you find it difficult to switch from the pathway that you're on into the pathway that God has chosen for you. I tell you the truth that everything that you think you've lost or you will lose, you will gain it 150 or 100 and more % if you embrace the alternative, which is the will of God for your life. And for everyone who does not know God, if you don't know this experience of God, I invite you to get to know him. I invite you to not to religion where you just go to church because it's a thing to do on Sundays, or you pray just to a God that you do not know of. I introduce you to a God who is real, a God who can actually order your steps in life, a God who can tell your story like it's like it's a book that has been written, very well written by himself. I invite you to open up your heart and receive him and get to know him afresh, because this God is real. And I know this because I know that there are greater levels. In Isaiah 58:12, it talks about desolate heights. And that's the thing that I'm pursuing, to attain to the thing that is in the mind of God that man has not attained to. Because I constantly look at what is in scripture. I look at the men like Moses, like Abraham, like Esther, like Joseph, all these stories that we read about, and they're amazing on so many levels. And I keep asking myself, why can we not attain to even half of these things? Because I know that we've not seen the things that these guys have experienced. Like, when was the last time that God showed up in form of a plague just to defend a people? We read of stories that are of the old, and yet Christ said that I go to the Father, and if you believe in me, you will do the things that I did, and greater things than this will you do, because I go to the Father. This is my pursuit. This is my pressing in point, that there has to be more to God than what we have experienced so far. And if God requires a man, because I know that he will not do it himself, he requires a man, a woman, he requires somebody who's able to give of themselves so that he can come on the earth to express himself. I give of myself, and I hope that you can join me today in surrendering everything that you have believed life is and embracing a whole totally different new way of thinking and new way of walking with God, so that he can find a reason and a basis to express himself on the earth. God bless you guys, and I pray that your life is encouraged and challenged even as you've listened to my story. The Lord bless you.
A big thank you. Once again, a big thank you to you, Sellah. A big thank you to Amanda and the rest of the team who have been behind the scenes and ensuring us just so that this can happen. A big thank you to my main man, Dero, who is right here with us. Last but definitely not least, a big thank you to Hemingway's Karen for just the amazing hospitality. Now let's go eat some lunch. Bye-bye.
Do you actually say that on camera?